Chapter 875. Xiao Sen's little face immediately turned awkward as he hurriedly said, "Second sister, don't talk nonsense. That Sun Tian is also my classmate." Xiao Lin immediately reached out and pinched her brother's little face as she giggled, "That's right, I want you to give it to her. Look, it's nice to be friends with your classmates." Arbor's little mouth curved as he held his brother's hand. "Xiao Sen, you haven't bullied your classmates in the academy recently, right?" No. Xiao Sen didn't expect that the topic would suddenly change to the academy. He immediately shook his little head and expressed his stance. Xiao Sen doesn't dare to forget elder sister's teachings for a single day. Ren Hongfei and I are now good friends. Really good friends? Really. Then what about your swine friend, Gao Fong, who was with you before? Xiao Mu asked worriedly. Xiao Sen laughed foolishly, "We haven't played together for a long time. After school, I always go with Ren Hongfei and Sun Tian. Second sister also saw it last time." Yes, that little girl smiled so sweetly at you. So her name is Sun Tian, her name is also sweet. Arbor's face darkened. Come, let us three siblings divide this silk flower. Little brother, you must remember to bring this most playful and adorable silk flower to little sister Sun Tian. Oh. Xiao Sen gloomily put away this maiden's gift as his little mouth secretly twitched. Stop. You country bumpkin, didn't you hear me call you? The young miss who was pushed away by Xiao Lin just now unrelentingly followed the siblings. She waved her hand and signaled for a few servants to come forward. She aggressively stood in front of the siblings' door with her hands on her hips. Xiao Lin immediately became angry. She placed her little hand on her waist as she stood in front of Arbor's Xiao Sen and angrily scolded the young miss. "I say, are you done yet? I'm already ignoring you, what else do you want? Are you asking for a beating?" Xiao Mu glanced at the young lady and recognized who she was. This was the third miss of the Marquis of Placation's estate, Su Mingzhu. Back then, when she was at the Qin estate, she had slapped an invisibility talisman on herself. When she saw Su Mingzhu torturing and killing the little beasts, she gave her a big slap in passing, causing Su Mingzhu to mistakenly think that it was Mu Qianqian who did it, and they got into a dogfight. It was fourth Miss Su Mingxin who had accompanied Su Mingzhu to Spring Dawn Garden to watch the sideshow performance. She recognized Xiao Mu with a glance, and she hastily went up to give a proper curtsy. Su Mingxin greets the Crown Prince Consort. Su Mingzhu was furious. During the New Year's banquet yesterday, everyone's focus was on that Crown Princess. Who would have noticed her, this elegant and refined little pitiful existence? Damn it. She was dressed up so beautifully, but the limelight was completely overshadowed by that country bumpkin Crown Princess. Do you want to cause trouble, huh? Xiao Lin rolled up her sleeves, looking like she was looking for someone to pick a fight with. She could tell that this neurotic woman in front of her was simply here to find trouble with them siblings. Sister. Fourth Miss Su hastily grabbed Su Mingzhu in fright. Sister, it's better not to be overly impudent in front of the Crown Princess. Scram. Su Mingzhu brusquely flung Su Mingxin's hand away and cast her a glance before scolding, "Useless thing, scram to the side. How the fuck did I get in your way by buying a silk flower?" Xiao Lin retorted angrily, "I ignored you when I heard your mockery earlier, yet you're still trying to pick on me, huh? Looking for a beating." Chapter 876. You're the one looking for a beating. Your whole family is looking for a beating. Su Mingzhu's anger surged as she pulled out a double-edged spear from her conscience. Let's talk after we fight. Seeing Su Mingzhu leap forward, a small figure suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Lin with a flash. The little monk's chubby face had a benevolent expression. He raised a chubby finger above his head and pointed at Su Mingzhu, who had jumped forward. This benefactress. This little monk sees a baleful aura on your face. Your brows are dark. I'm afraid it's an omen of great misfortune. Arbor's mouth twitched. Xiao Lin also broke down in an instant. She withdrew her angry expression and chuckled. Come back. Xiao Sen unhappily ran forward and picked up the little monk. Why are you joining in the fun? A little bald donkey like you dares to challenge me. Preposterous. Su Mingzhu's anger flared. She controlled her mystic energy and poured it all into the sharp blade. A cold light flashed through her eyes as she suddenly jumped up and aimed her spear at Xiao Sen's back. You're courting death. Xiao Lin, who was already prepared, suddenly threw a punch and directly knocked the other party's spear to the side. Water Spirit Talisman. The little monk suddenly turned his head and threw out the talisman. Boom! A water column swept out. Under the shocked and astonished gazes of Su Mingzhu and the others, Su Mingzhu and the group of menservants were sent flying in an instant. Bang 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 bang. The water column once again fell from the sky and hit Su Mingzhu and the others head-on. Su Mingzhu hastily activated her defensive mystic artifact to protect her body. This was still able to withstand the surging water spirit energy. Those manservants were miserable as they were all sent flying far away, groaning as they couldn't get up. This lasted for a full 3 minutes before the water spirit finally disappeared. Su Mingzhu had already spat out a mouthful of blood from the abuse and collapsed on the ground. As the water waves surged, no one dared to go forward. Some of the carriages that were heading towards Spring Dawn Garden stopped far away. Fourth young Miss Su wasn't affected. She covered her mouth with one hand and looked at her sister who was lying on the ground and unable to get up for the time being in shock. The little monk clapped his hands and said, I told you not to do it. Benefactress. The omen of great misfortune has come true. Jolin laughed out loud and grabbed the little monk into his arms. He reached out to rub his chubby little face and said, Kong Kong, you're really too cute. What's going on? A gentle voice came from the carriage. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a beautiful girl walked down from the carriage. She glanced at Arbor and the others with a strange expression. At this time, the coachman suddenly cried out excitedly, Miss, don't you often ask me who was the person who saved you that day? It was her. It was that noble lady who saved you. Arbor also recognized the woman who came out of the carriage. She was Li Xiu-yi, the third daughter of Li Shaoqing of the Guanlu Temple. However, there was a strange emotion in Li Xiu-yi's eyes that shook slightly. She stepped forward and bowed respectfully to Arbor. I didn't know that the one who saved me that day was your highness, the crown princess. Arbor nodded with an indifferent expression. She was just passing by. Li Xiu-yi glanced at her as if she wanted to say something. Then, she glanced at Su Mingxin. Fourth young Miss Su, what happened to you guys? Su Mingxin smiled awkwardly. There was a small misunderstanding between my third older sister and the crown princess. Chapter 877. Oh. Was it just a small misunderstanding? It escalated to the point of fighting. Li Xiu-yi cleverly didn't say anything, but her eyes flickered slightly when she saw third young Miss Su's miserable state. Su Mingxin bowed to Arbor again. Crown Princess, this humble girl will take her leave first. Please forgive me. Arbor nodded and didn't feel like arguing with Su Mingzhu. Su Mingxin had someone help Su Mingzhu up and brought her to the carriage to return to the estate immediately. She was also very worried. Su Mingzhu had come out perfectly fine, but now she was being carried back. She didn't know if Madame would let her, a little concubine's daughter, off. Older sister, who is that person? Do you know her? Xiao Lin pursed her lips in the direction Su Mingzhu left. You should have seen her at yesterday's banquet. She's the legitimate third young miss of the Marquis of Placation's estate, Su Mingzhu. There were so many orioles and swallows at yesterday's banquet. Who would remember who? Xiao Lin puffed up her mouth and blew. This was precisely what Su Mingzhu couldn't swallow. She had dressed up beautifully to attend the banquet, thinking that she could outshine the crowd and attract the attention of a few noble young masters. In the end, the limelight was completely snatched away by the crown prince consort from the countryside. Li Xiu Yi said with a smile, "Crown princess, then let's enter the garden. May I know if the crown princess has reserved a private room beforehand? If not, if you don't mind, you can come to this humble girl's private room." Arbor led his brother and sister into Spring Dawn Garden's main hall. At first glance, there was a dense crowd. The main hall was already full. That's fine. Then I'll have to trouble young Miss Li, Arbor thought for a moment before nodding in agreement. Since she was already here, if she didn't bring these monkeys to watch a sideshow performance, who knew how they would torment her? Li Xiu Yi smiled slightly and gave a look to the maidservant beside her. Not long after, that maidservant brought a waiter over. He bowed and greeted them before leading the group to a private room on the second floor. There was a row of windows in the private room. When they pushed open the windows, they could see the lively performance below. The view was not bad. Soon, someone brought in some tea and snacks. They weren't very exquisite and were just enough to fill the stomach. A few children immediately cheered and ran to the window to lie down and watch with great interest. Arbor sat down at the table and poured himself a cup of tea. Then, he looked at Miss Li who sat opposite him and nodded slightly. "You can speak now." Miss Li was stunned. She looked at her in a daze. For a moment, she seemed to be a little embarrassed. "Crown Princess, what makes you think that my daughter has something to say?" "Your eyes told me." Arbor took a sip of tea and frowned slightly. This tea was really crude and plain. It didn't taste like tea at all. Li Xiu Yi couldn't help but laugh. The Crown Princess is really straightforward. She raised her head and glanced at the two maidservants beside her. "You two leave first. I have something to say to the Crown Princess alone." The two maidservants hesitated and looked at each other. Under Li Xiu Yi's sharp gaze, they finally left submissively. Li Xiu Yi stood up decisively and walked to Arbor. She leaned to one side and bowed. "May the Crown Princess bestow an illness talisman." Arbor didn't expect that Li Xiu Yi was here to ask for an illness talisman. She couldn't help but be stunned. "What do you want an illness talisman for?" Chapter 878. With Arbor's exceptional intelligence, she casually thought about it and couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "The illness charm that you were afflicted with last time. You also begged for it yourself? You purposely put the illness charm on yourself?" Li Xiu Yi shook her head. "The illness charm last time was something I bought by chance in a talisman shop a few years ago. At that time, I bought it out of curiosity for fun, but I didn't expect it to come in handy. Since the Crown Princess can undo that illness charm, she's naturally a talisman expert. This humble girl begs the Crown Princess to bestow me with an illness charm. I beg you, Crown Princess." Li Xiu Yi suddenly bowed her head and heavily kowtowed to Arbor. The three children turned around from the window and couldn't help but feel a little strange when they saw Li Xiu Yi like this. But very quickly, their attention was once again attracted by the wonderful performance in the main hall. At this moment, in the main hall, a young juggler was leading a ferocious piebald tiger, causing waves of exclamations from the crowd. Arbor looked at Li Xiu Yi for a while before saying with certainty, "At the banquet yesterday, I heard from Consort Cheng that you've already been betrothed to her son, the son of the great king, Mo Jiao. Do you think they'll give up on you after you use the illness charm? Consort Cheng wouldn't let her son marry a dying person into the family." Li Xiu Yi's eyes were especially bright. She wouldn't be able to stand that bad luck. "That's true." Arbor nodded. Marrying a concubine was a joyous matter. No one would be willing to marry a half-dead concubine into the family, as it would be tainted with bad luck. Everyone else wants to marry the prince, why aren't you willing? Li Xiu-yi didn't hide her disdain for Mo Jiao at all and spat, he already has so many wives and concubines, his body is dirty and smelly, I don't like him at all. Arbor curved her small mouth, feeling that Miss Li's words were very interesting and somewhat to her taste. But usually, when a young lady is forced to marry, don't they cry, throw a tantrum, and threaten to hang themselves? What's the point of that? Li Xiu-yi raised her head and looked at Arbor with a determined gaze. I don't want to do such a stupid thing for a stinky man like him. If I'm so sick that I can't even get out of bed, I believe that Consort Cheng won't carry such an unlucky person like me into the great king's mansion. Arbor nodded and began to appreciate Miss Li's straightforwardness. You're just an ordinary person, but you're braver than most people in this world. Good. I'll help you, but you have to promise me one thing. Crown Princess, please speak. This humble girl isn't afraid of climbing a mountain of blades or diving into a pot of boiling oil. Li Xiu-yi exclaimed as she gazed at Xiao Mu with bright eyes. I don't need you to climb a mountain of swords, nor do I need you to jump into a frying pan. As long as you keep it a secret. You can't tell anyone that I'm a charm master. Xiao Mu didn't want to seek trouble for herself. Curse practitioners had been labeled as demonic beings and had always been suppressed by various parties. If someone with ulterior motives found out that she could create illness curses and was an out-and-out curse practitioner, then it would certainly cause a lot of trouble. Although she wasn't afraid, she found it annoying. I, Li Xiu-yi, swear to the heavens that if I dare to reveal the crown princess secret one day, I will be condemned by the heavens and die a horrible death. Arbor nodded and then took out a sickness charm from her inner world and put it in her hand. She said to her with a serious expression, this sickness charm of mine is much more powerful than the one you had before. Chapter 879. This is a high-level sickness talisman. Once I use it on you, the pain will be 100 or 1,000 times worse than before. You have to be prepared to endure it. Li Xiu-yi's eyes lit up, and she nodded vigorously. Yes, I'm prepared. After I use this talisman on you, I will first use the talisman's power to seal the sickness talisman for 10 hours. This way, when you get home, it will suddenly act up around 10 in the morning. Yes. Li Xiu-yi shuffled forward on her knees, her eyes filled with longing as she looked at Arbor. Crown Princess, I'm not afraid. Please use it. It was Arbor's first time seeing a girl so longing for sickness. Shaking her head, she took out a high-level safety talisman and handed it to her. You must not lose this talisman. When you really can't take it anymore, use the talisman. It can dispel the curse on your body. Yes. Li Xiu-yi's eyes were filled with gratitude when she saw that the little girl was already so considerate of her. At the banquet, she had always heard people whispering about how the crown princess was arrogant and unreasonable, how she was cold-hearted and expressionless. But now that she had the courage to interact with her, she realized that the crown princess wasn't as bad as people said. Under the crown princess's expressionless and icy face, there was a soft and gentle heart hidden. Only when one was close to her could they see it clearly. That was why it was useless to rely on hearsay when dealing with people. Some people and some things could only be seen clearly if you used your heart to interact with them and think about them. You shouldn't just follow what others say without any opinions of your own. Consort Cheng is an old fox. She might test you many times. It might take a long time. Arbor took out a small bottle of medicine from her sleeve and handed it to her. This medicine can help you temporarily block your 5 senses. If it's too painful, just block it. Li Xiu-yi was already so moved that she couldn't speak. She nodded heavily with tears in her eyes. Crown Princess, I can't repay your kindness. Once my daughter passes this hurdle, if you need anything in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. Arbor activated the talisman, and a stream of light flowed into Li Xiu's forehead. Li Xiu suddenly felt a chill spread through her limbs, but it quickly dispersed. Arbor put down 2 fingers and lightly said, "I've locked it up for you. The talisman power will be maintained for 5 hours before it dissipates. At that time, you should be prepared, it should be very painful." Then, Arbor clenched his fist slightly and crushed the sickly talisman in his hand into powder and dissipated. Get out, all of you get out." A loud noise came from the hall below. "The Qin estate's eldest young master has already monopolized this place. Get out. Get out." Li Xiu was in a good mood now that she had gotten rid of one of her worries. She was not afraid of pain, but she was afraid of marrying a disgusting man and having to bear his children for him. She would be disgusted to death if she had to face him for the rest of her life. Hearing the noise coming from downstairs, they all went to the window and looked down. The door to the private room was suddenly pushed open, and a person who looked like a vice troop leader walked in while rubbing his hands together awkwardly. "I'm really sorry, ladies and young masters. The Qin estate's eldest young master has booked the entire place and invited his friends from the pugilistic world to watch the performance. So, this. Ladies and gentlemen, please rest assured that the fee will definitely be refunded to you." Li Xiu's face immediately darkened. "Is this a matter of money?" Chapter 880. When the vice troop master saw Li Xiu's unrelenting attitude, he couldn't help but grumble inwardly. When he had gone to greet the people in the other private rooms earlier, when they heard that it was the Qin estate's eldest young master, they all impatiently went down to greet that young Master Qin with fawning expressions. But these 2 ladies before him, one was expressionless, while the other was scowling. They didn't seem easy to drive away. Li Xiu glanced coldly at the vice troop master. "Go down and tell that eldest young Master Qin that his banquet is for his guests and has nothing to do with us. If he wants to clear the place, tell him to come up himself and talk to us." The vice troop master answered obsequiously. Seeing that these 2 ladies didn't seem like people to be trifled with, he hastily waved his hand and obediently left. Crown Princess. Li Xiu turned to look at Arbor. Arbor waved her hand and said, "They're only here to watch the show. No need to be long-winded with them." The children saw that the performance had ended and the commotion had ended. The people in the lobby downstairs were all walking out, so they couldn't help but purse their lips and turn to ask Arbor, "Sister, they're not performing anymore. Let's wait a bit. Do you want to come over and eat some fruit first?" She took out some fresh fruit from her inner world and waved at the 3 children. Jolin and the other 2 hurried over, and each of them picked up an orange and started peeling it. At this moment, the vice troop master knocked on the door again and walked in, saying awkwardly, "Young Master Qin and some of his friends have said to invite you all down." Arbor hooked her finger at the vice troop master. The vice troop master ran over obsequiously. Mississippi, Arbor abruptly reached out and clasped the vice troop master's neck, ruthlessly pressing his old face onto the table. With a loud bang, the vice troop master felt half of his face hurt terribly, and it was probably going to turn completely green. Arbor said coldly, "If you don't want to die, tell them to come up." With that said, she released the small hand clasping the back of his neck. The vice troop master felt his entire body turn cold, and he involuntarily shuddered. "Bring in some hot water." Arbor glanced at him coldly. The vice troop leader didn't dare to speak any more nonsense. He nodded his head repeatedly, bowed, and cautiously walked out of the door step by step. A few minutes later, the waiter brought hot water in with a respectful expression. Footsteps could be heard coming from the stairs. Not long after, the door to the private room was pushed open. Eldest young Master Qin's tall and slender figure appeared at the door in a dark purple robe. There was a dot of cinnabar between his eyebrows, and his eyes were beautiful and captivating. His long hair was still untied and hung loosely below his waist. His entire being exuded a wild and charming aura. I was wondering which ominous star was causing trouble. Qin Xian smirked when he saw Arbor. He leaned against the door and looked at the little girl with a smile. So it's you, the unreasonable little fiend. Arbor glanced at him expressionlessly and said coldly, "Who are you?" Qin Xian rolled his eyes and strode in with his long legs. He dragged a stool to sit down in front of her and looked at her calmly. "Don't pretend, all right? Mu Xiao Bao, I know it's you. Don't think that I won't recognize you just because you changed your face." Arbor reflexively reached out to touch her little face and continued with a wooden expression, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Heh heh," eldest young Master Qin snorted. Chapter 881. There's no point in pretending like this. Qin Xian raised his wrist and grandly poured himself a cup of tea. He looked at Arbor with a grin and said, "Little Bao, we haven't seen each other for half a month. Isn't it too fake for you to say that you don't know me?" Li Xiu-yi snuck a glance at Arbor. She didn't understand the situation, so she wasn't in a hurry to interrupt. "Eldest young sir, why don't you introduce us?" A dozen or so young men and women rushed in noisily. The one who spoke was a powder-faced man who boasted of being dissolute and fanned himself with a folding fan. Arbor only felt that this person looked somewhat familiar. Situ-yi was the last to enter. When he saw Arbor, he couldn't help but be startled before exclaiming in surprise, "Little junior sister." Arbor rolled her eyes. This time, she couldn't continue pretending. Arbor also recognized the two people beside Situ-yi. One was that weakling Shang Kun from Daybreak sect, and the other was the sect master's daughter, Liang Qingqing. "Little junior sister." Liang Qingqing happily walked forward and greeted her. "Senior brother Situ, senior sister Liang." Arbor nodded at the two. Qin Xian couldn't help but be amused. "Not pretending anymore?" Arbor snorted and turned her head to give him a lukewarm look. She then stood up and said, "Let's go." Since senior brother Situ was here, then she would give senior brother face. Miss Li also stood up. Arbor had just walked to the door when a man with a glossy powdered face pulled out a folding fan to block her path. "Hey, Mississippi. Since you're here, then stay here and play with everyone." The man winked at her with a mischievous grin. He waved his fan back and forth in the middle of winter, looking very self-righteous and flirtatious. Situ-yi was just about to warn the man when he saw eldest Miss Chiao pick up a flower pot placed on the flower shelf by the door. With a bang, she smashed it on the head of the pink-faced youth, knocking him down on the spot. Qin Xian's mouth twitched, and he couldn't help but raise his hand to rub his forehead. Was this Hu Yukong of the Marquis of Su An's estate a fool? Back when he was at the Qin estate, the little stoic had smashed him with a flower pot. His head was wrapped in layers of bandages, and he only recovered after recuperating for more than half a month. Now they're here again. History was shockingly similar. Hu Yukong stood up with his head covered in blood. He touched his head and screamed, someone come. Young Master Hu, young Master Hu." The people at the door immediately became a mess. Some hurriedly ordered people to get gauze and water to bandage their wounds, while others were trembling with fear and pale faces as they used their bodies to block Arbor. Jolin rolled up his little sleeves, looking like he was ready to fight. Just as the commotion was going on, the sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Arbor turned his head and saw Blackie's anxious face appear at the entrance of the staircase. "Eldest Miss." Hey, Z gasped for breath and hurriedly ran up to her and cried out in alarm, "Something happened at home." Arbor's pupils contracted instantly, and his entire body's aura froze to the extreme. He lifted his leg and kicked the person blocking his way. Scram! Then he directly walked to Blackie's side. Miss Li, Jolin, and the other two also ran out the door. "Wait a minute, you smashed my head, so you can't leave." Hu Yokong's body swayed as he staggered 2 steps forward. Someone suddenly cried out in alarm, "Young master who, that's the crown princess. You didn't attend the banquet yesterday, so you don't know that she." Arbor left this group of people behind and hastily followed Blackie down the stairs. Chapter 882. When Madame and Madame Ren were riding the carriage home, they were stopped by someone halfway. "Hey," Z said anxiously. Lord heard from Sister Chunnying that eldest Miss had come to Spring Dawn Garden, so he sent Hey, Z to search for Mississippi. "Where is my mother right now?" Xiao Lin asked anxiously. "Second Miss, Madame was abducted. Those people even injured Madame Ren." Hey, Z hastily said. Madame Ren also said that Madame was also injured at the time, but it wasn't serious. Those people are aggressive and well-trained. They don't look like ordinary hooligans. Arbor clenched her fists. Sure enough, they had great guts. Someone dared to directly attack her mother in the Mo Kingdom capital's territory. Since they dared to do it, she dared to destroy them at all costs. Then what do we do now? Xiao Lin cried out anxiously. Did my father find out who abducted my mother? Lord doesn't have a clue at all. When Hey, Z left, Lord had already brought people to the capital magistrate's office to report the case. The capital magistrate must be as anxious as ants on a hot pan when he received the report that a madam of a marquis's estate had been abducted in broad daylight in the capital under the watchful eyes of everyone. Arbor paused and took out a talisman pen, writing a few strokes on the communication jade talisman. She then turned back and said to Hey, Z, send second Miss and the others back to the residence first. Sister will handle this matter. Don't worry, go home first. Yes. Hey, Z nodded. Eldest Miss, please be careful. If there's any news, discuss it with Lord first. Arbor nodded coldly and then watched as Hey, Z brought Xiao Lin and the others into the carriage and left. At this time, the communication jade talisman in her palm was already slightly warm. Arbor flipped it open, and a layer of frost covered her face. She suddenly roared at the sky, "Good! Excellent!" Lightning's heart involuntarily skipped a beat when she saw her suddenly dashing off in a certain direction at lightning speed. She hurriedly used the jade messenger talisman to hastily write a sentence. The Crown Prince Consort has gone to the Qiao estate. Quickly send someone over. Then, he hurriedly followed her footsteps. With a wave of his hand, a dozen or so black figures appeared from the shadows and followed closely behind. She knew the position of the Qiao family's main family very well. After all, she had stayed in that family for a period of time in her previous life and had seen the faces of that family. Walking west from Hualing Street, it didn't take long for them to arrive at the main entrance of the Qiao family's residence. The two red-striped stone lions were squatting there with ferocious expressions as usual. Their mouths were wide open, and they looked like they were about to tear everything apart. This was the main residence of the Qiao family. Arbor's eyes seemed to be smeared with a layer of frost. He stretched out his hand and summoned Qing Yuan. Go, smash their door. Today, I'll allow you to eat as much as you want. Whoever dares to stop us, you can eat him. Lightning and the others who came with her were all stunned when they heard the Crown Princess's fierce words. This was the main residence of the Qiao family, and the Crown Princess was still a girl from the Qiao family. If she did this, she would be cursed by the world for betraying her ancestors and forgetting her roots. Betraying his ancestors and forgetting his roots? Pah! This bunch of shameless villains, what right did they have to say that they were Arbor's clan relatives? She wouldn't acknowledge a single one of them. Since she didn't acknowledge their identities, how was she betraying her ancestors and forgetting her roots? Qing Yuan happily spread its wings and rose into the air. It screeched sharply in the direction of the main entrance and shot an ice pillar down. A loud boom sounded. Chapter 883. The main door was instantly smashed by Qing Yuan's brute force, creating a hole the size of a ball. The two servants who were hiding behind the door, eavesdropping and laughing, were immediately thrown out tragically, letting out two shrill screams. Qing Yuan circled twice in the air before suddenly swooping down. Several sharp ice blades once again shot out from its mouth, ripping the two main doors apart on the spot, nailing them full of holes. The two broken door boards tottered for a moment before collapsing with a boom, unable to withstand the force. The people of the Qiao clan all rushed out from their respective rooms, hurriedly rushing towards the main door. They were simply dumbstruck, not expecting that there would be someone so daring in broad daylight, directly attacking their Qiao clan's main residence. What the fuck? Who exactly was it? They actually had the guts to do such a thing. A swarm of people rushed towards the entrance, dumbstruck as they looked in front of them. At this time, it was close to dusk. A wisp of the setting sun hung over the treetops, and a few gusts of cold wind brushed past. They saw a little girl wearing plain pink clothes, holding an enormous club that was half her height, standing at the Qiao estate's entrance, looking at them with an indifferent expression. In the depths of her vicious eyes, it seemed like a tiger or wolf was roaring. Have Qiao Dongbua come out? Arbor stared at the group of Qiao clan disciples who ran out, his voice indifferent as he spoke. Ha, what kind of person dares to rush to the Qiao estate's entrance and shout? Who do you think you are? If you have my grandfather come out to see you, he will. Ah! Xiao and I only felt that her neck seemed to have been hooked by something. For a moment, she widened her eyes in fright, and before she could resist, she had already been swiftly pulled over. The brothers and sisters beside her tried to reach out to grab her, but how could they resist that huge force? Xiao and I instantly fell into an ice-cold little palm, her entire body trembling for no reason. Looking up, she just happened to look into the little girl's pair of frosty eyes that were filled with dense cold intent. What kind of pitch-black, serene, and endless eyes were those? Xiao and I opened her mouth, but before she could speak, she felt a sudden pain on her cheek. The little girl had already given her a big slap in the face with lightning speed. Xiao and I, the young miss of the main family who gave her quite a bit of suffering in her previous life, Qiao Zhongda's extremely talented daughter. She remembered that when she was 9 years old, she had followed her father to the Qiao family's main residence. Since then, she had been living in a small, dilapidated courtyard outside the main residence. During this period of time, this Miss Qiao had often brought a group of young masters and young ladies to her house to flaunt her prowess. She had arrogantly ordered her to do all kinds of hard and tiring work, treating her like the lowest servant girl. At that time, she had never opened her profound, but she had never given up on herself. With the elegant title of the Qiao family's trash on her head, she was looked down upon by everyone in the Qiao family. Anyone could step up and step on her. She didn't expect to meet Xiao and I for the first time in this life. In her previous life, the seemingly unreachable Xiao and I was actually so weak that she could summon her with a wave of her hand. To be honest, there were many things that she didn't want to pursue. In particular, it wasn't the kind of great hatred that was as deep as a sea of blood. In fact, she couldn't be bothered to bother herself with some trivial daily conflicts, such as the trifling matter with Zhou Tao in Quoto village. This was also in order to let go of that ice-cold and broken heart of hers. Those young masters and young ladies of the main family like Xiao and I were indeed hateful. During those dark days between the ages of 9 and 16, when she had yet to open her profound, who knew how much pain and suffering they had inflicted on her body and soul. Chapter 884. She could not care less about these things. She could treat those trials and hardships as the greatest test of her life. It was the polishing of her temperament and also the creation of her current life. Because, after all, those were matters from her previous life. In this life, these things simply never happened. She didn't want to cling to the past, but she ultimately couldn't walk out of her past attachment. For example, she simply couldn't walk out of the matter with Fan Qiuhe. So the moment they met, she simply couldn't control her impulsive heart and wanted to kill him on the spot. Yes. She wanted to kill Fan Chilha. She especially wanted to kill him at the banquet that day. She knew that her behavior at that time was especially like someone with a mental problem. She was sick. She herself was very clear that strictly speaking, this could be a kind of psychological illness. It was as if these things clearly never happened in this life, but the moment she saw Xiao and I, her body actually reacted with pain. She felt that the little finger that Xiao and I broke in her previous life was currently twitching slightly. This was a kind of psychological torture. To tell the truth, after returning to the capital for so long, she simply didn't intend to have any relationship with the main Xiao family. It was fine to treat everything from her previous life as a passing cloud and smoke. Unfortunately, others might not let her off even if she thought this way. This was the current situation. If she lay dormant, others would bite her to death. If she wanted to live, she could only counterattack. Have Xiao Donghua fucking come out. Xiao Mu repeated her words again, and she slightly tightened her grip on Xiao Ni's neck. It would truly be a pity if such a beautiful neck were to break. Miss, please stop. A young man walked out of the crowd. He looked to be around 25 or 26 years old. His appearance wasn't very good looking and could only be considered decent. Arbor wasn't unfamiliar with this person at all. He was Qiao Chong, one of the top-ranked genius mystic cultivators in the main family. As a level 8 mystic cultivator, his talent was slightly inferior to his younger sisters. In her previous life, when Arbor was 9 years old, Xiao Ni was already a level 4 mystic cultivator when she was a little over 11 years old. Therefore, Xiao Ni was arrogant and complacent. Bearing the entire family's favor, she disliked this 9-year-old trash who hadn't even triggered her mystic meridians. And now, the 17-year-old Xiao Ni was already a level 7 mystic cultivator. Everyone present, including Qiao Chong, felt their hearts tremble when a little girl grabbed a level 7 mystic cultivator's neck the moment they met. The little girl in front of him looked like she was only 14 or 15 years old. What kind of cultivation was this? She must already be a level 10 great mystic cultivator. The Qiao clan's disciples couldn't see through Arbor's cultivation at all. They could only see a huge blue divine bird circling above her head. Their minds were a little muddled for a moment. It was common knowledge that only level 10 and above mystic cultivators could form contracts with mystic beasts. This little lady was already a level 10 great mystic cultivator at such a young age. His talent was simply astonishing. Arbor carried Xiao and I effortlessly, as if he was carrying a hen, and strode into the Qiao residence. But she saw someone rush up to snatch Xiao and I from her hands. Arbor coldly curled her lips at that person and broke one of Xiao Ni's fingers with a snap. After this, Xiao Ni's entire body trembled as if she was soaked in cold water. 3 of her fingers had already been broken, and no one dared to come up to snatch Xiao and I from her hands. Chapter 885. Previously, Prince Mo had sent people to keep an eye on the Qiao family's main residence. The moment Xiao Donghua and company made a move to kidnap Arbor's mother, the Hidden Night Pavilion knew about it. Therefore, when Arbor sent a message to the Hidden Night Pavilion, he received a quick reply saying that it was Xiao Donghua who did it. However, before the Crown Prince could send people to rescue her, his Crown Princess had already knocked on their door. When Prince Mo received this news, he immediately jumped up from his seat. He didn't even bother with approving the memorials and directly tossed aside his cinnabar brush as he stood up, his face brimming with killing intent as he ordered, immediately summon Yu Xiu and bring 3,000 dragon saliva guards to the Qiao family's main residence. Hui Feng looked helpless. You said that you would only go see the Crown Princess after taking care of matters. But can this be delayed? No, I have to go see Jojo immediately. He didn't want to delay a single minute. You're bringing 3,000 dragon saliva guards to the Qiao estate to flatten the Qiao estate's main residence. Huifeng rolled his eyes. Don't worry. This subordinate dares to bet my head that our crown princess will definitely be fine. The unlucky one must be someone else. Hurry and make preparations, the crown prince roared at Huifeng. The latter rubbed his nose and withdrew, feeling disinterested. Not long after, Yu Xiu, who received the news, personally led 3,000 dragon saliva guards to the palace's main entrance. When the great king received the news, he initially thought that something serious had happened. For example, someone was plotting a rebellion in the capital to endanger his throne. After asking around, he found out that the crown prince wanted to bring his iron-blooded personal guards to the Qiao family's main residence to rescue the crown princess's mother. He was so angry that he immediately threw away an inkstone. Go, summon the crown princess to the main hall for this humble one. This humble one wants to have a good talk with her. This was his daughter-in-law's trivial matters. He couldn't keep letting his son interfere, right? What was a dignified crown prince who didn't attend to his proper duties and didn't think about national affairs, meddling in his daughter-in-law's family matters all day long? No wonder his old wife had been nagging at him recently, saying that the crown princess was a troublemaker who had led their good son astray. A father who loved his son dearly paced back and forth in the hall. He was determined to resist the fear in his heart. He was determined to find his daughter-in-law and have a good talk with her. Not long after, the manager eunuch, Gong Chang'an, ran in, panting, and knelt down on the ground. Reporting to the great king. The crown princess went to the Qiao estate in the evening and smashed the main gate. She fought her way in to save her mother. What? The great king's hand landed on the armrest, and he immediately felt the pain in his hand. He secretly rubbed his wrist. This crown princess is too much. She was the crown princess of a country. Why do you have no sense of propriety? What can't you send someone to do? Why did he have to personally come knocking on their door? Was this appropriate? Outrageous, outrageous, outrageous. Gong Chang'an. This servant is here. Gong Chang'an wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He had a feeling that the great king was going to trick him. Sure enough, the great king angrily said, immediately go to the Qiao estate's main residence and bring the crown princess back for this humble one. Just say that this humble one is summoning her immediately. Go quickly. Yes, yes, great king, this servant will go right away. Gong Chang'an's face was bitter as he submissively retreated. Then, he wished he could howl at the sky. Woo, why was it him again? During the New Year's banquet yesterday, he had clearly seen that the crown princess was a cold and independent person. How could she be moved by a servant like him? Chapter 886. He felt that he was asking for a beating by going to the Qiao estate's main residence to find the crown princess. Wah! Gong Chang'an's face was mournful as he continuously tried to wipe the tears from the corners of his eyes and left. At the same time, Arbor lifted the pale-faced Qiao and I like a little chick and kicked over several Qiao family disciples along the way. He walked directly to Qiao Chong and impatiently said, go inform Qiao Donghua and tell him to fucking come out and see me. Otherwise, I'll immediately snap her neck. The Qiao family can't afford to lose a genius mystic cultivator. Qiao Chong's expression changed slightly, and he nodded and said, I've already informed family head. At this time, a person hastily rushed over from the small path and casually saluted Arbor before haughtily raising his head. Miss, family head invites you to the main hall. Ah! Qiao and I only felt that her neck was about to be snapped. Terror and fear flashed through her eyes, and she couldn't help but scream. She was really too scared. She felt that if she didn't do as the fiend in front of her said, her neck might be broken in the next moment. Shameless, you still dare to put on airs in front of this lady? Tell him to come out and see me immediately. If he's a second late, I'll kill her. Arbor flew up and kicked the messenger boy's chest. That person rolled backward with a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth and a horrified expression. How could he still dare to put on airs? He hastily pissed his pants in terror and returned to report. At this time, Lightning and company had already gathered at the entrance. Following Xiao Ni's shout, they rushed in and stood behind Arbor with baleful expressions. Arbor's eyes were filled with killing intent as he looked at the group of Qiao family disciples who were continuously retreating. I'll count to 3. If Qiao Donghua still doesn't show himself, I'll have her go to the Yellow Springs first and pave the way for you brats. Ah! Don't. Xiao Ni shook her head in horror. She was truly scared, so scared that her body couldn't stop trembling. In the past 17 years, she had never felt so insignificant. It was as if that fiend woman could kill her with a single finger. 1. 2. Have mercy. Xiao Donghua suddenly rushed over from afar, with the two brothers Qiao Zhongde and Qiao Zhonghao by his side. Behind them were Mu Boming, Qin Guilu, and the patriarchs of the Dou and Hong families. After that, Omega Kotoku slowly walked over. His deep gaze landed on Arbor. The two young masters of the Dou family, Mu Boming's son, and the others also quickly followed behind their father. Their gazes all landed on Arbor with some astonishment. Arbor's lips curved slightly as he mocked, Xiao Donghua, you coward, so you've actually invited a lot of helpers. Xiao Donghua's face instantly turned red. Xiao Zhongde said angrily, watch your tone. This is your granduncle. Arbor's scattering meteors flew out, directly hitting Xiao Zhongde's chest. The latter was immediately shocked, and at the same time he leaned back, the profound energy around his body had already protected his vitals. But with two pops, two small nails still pierced into his body, causing Xiao Zhongde to furrow his brows in pain as his entire body trembled. Arbor grabbed Xiao Ni's collar and fiercely struck the back of her head. His freaking strength made Second Dou and the other's eyelids involuntarily twitch. Xiao Ni abruptly knelt down with a wretched cry. Arbor grabbed the back of her collar, and with a rip, Xiao Ni felt a chill in front of her chest. Her lapel had actually been torn open in front of everyone. This chapter is a gift. End of chapter 7. I'm going to eat. Chapter 887. Arbor coldly stared at Xiao Donghua and said, I want to see my mother. Otherwise, I'll hang her naked body at the city gate. Let's see if your old Xiao family still wants this old face. You. Xiao Zhongde was so angry that he leaned back, and he almost vomited blood from his throat. He had truly never seen such a ruthless little girl. How should he put it? She didn't even give people any time to react, and suddenly, the entire situation took a sharp turn to the point where it was irreversible. They were all old people, but they were actually led by the nose by a little girl with just a few words. Not to mention that Xiao Zhongde was angered to death, Xiao Donghua was even more furious. Arbor! How dare you! Bang! Arbor's hand viciously chopped at the back of Xiao Ni's neck, and with another ripping sound, Xiao Ni screamed and cried. She only felt that the clothes on her upper body were almost completely torn apart by that savage girl. If you continue to consider, your genius granddaughter will be exposed naked in front of everyone. If you dare to make a move on Xiao Ni again, see how I'll use the same method to deal with your mother. Xiao Zhongde shouted. A sharp light flashed in Arbor's eyes. A dagger instantly appeared in her hand, and she cut off half of Xiao Ni's ear. Who dares to touch my mother? I'll let his entire family die without a burial ground. Xiao Donghua, you coward. Prepare to let everyone in your Qiao estate wash their necks clean and wait. Die. Is this your fate? Arbor shouted sternly. Qing Wan, who felt her emotional fluctuations, screeched in the air, and then spat out a mouthful of dense ice mist in the direction of Xiao Donghua and the others. Xiao Donghua was overwhelmed with shock, and he hurriedly grabbed his two sons and retreated. The stone floor beneath their feet was instantly covered by a layer of ice mist, and several cracks appeared. "Dad, Dad, save me! Dad!" Xiao En screamed shrilly as she lay half-sprawled on the ground, half of her face dripping with blood. Her half-naked body trembled uncontrollably, and she stretched out her hands to pull at the air in front of her. She screamed shrilly, "Grandpa, save me, Grandpa! She's crazy, crazy! Save me, save!" Xiao Mu picked up Xiao Ni's head and grabbed her hair that was as disheveled as withered grass. She then dragged Xiao En a few steps forward. Arbor pointed the bloody dagger at Xiao Donghua and the others. Drawing a semicircle, he roared with a cold expression, "I want to see my mother. Now!" Everyone looked at her in shock. Perhaps they had never seen a young lady who could be so ruthless. Half of her face was splattered with Xiao Ni's blood, but her pair of clear, cold moon-like eyes emitted a terrifying light. "Crown Princess, calm down. I can assure you that family head Xiao didn't make things difficult for your mother." Mu Boming hurriedly stretched out a hand and said, "Let go of Miss Xiao first, she." "Shut up. I didn't catch your mother. What kind of cynical remarks are you spouting?" Xiao Mu's bloody dagger was about to stab Xiao Ni's head again. Xiao Zhongde was so scared that his face was drained of all color. He jumped up in fear and trepidation. "Bring him. Hurry and bring him out." Xiao Donghua said angrily with a purple face, "Why you little bastard, why you actually dared to be so heavy-handed to your clan sister? I am going to expunge your name from the clan." Arbor shot him a cold glance. Chapter 888. Then, she grabbed Xiao Ni's hair and turned around. Her pale face was stained with blood, but it couldn't hide her elegant and refined features. "Ha!" Arbor sneered and looked at Xiao Donghua mockingly. "Old thing. Do you think I care?" "Jojo." A weak call came from the corridor. Xiao Mu grabbed the bloodied Xiao En and turned around. When she saw Wei Ziqin running over from the corridor, her eyes suddenly brightened. Lightning quickly led people to help Wei Ziqin and looked at the people around Wei Ziqin warily. "Jojo, it's Jojo. It really is Jojo." Arbor's gaze moved to Wei Ziqin's side. Looking at the familiar face, she couldn't help but be stunned. "Sixth aunt. Sixth uncle." "Yes." Sixth Aunt Xiao and Sixth Uncle Xiao nodded and looked at her with a smile. Then, they looked uneasily at Xiao En in her hands. Xiao Mu's gaze then shifted to a tall and frivolous woman beside the two people. "Your sister Xiaoya." Arbor looked at Xiaoya and asked hesitantly. Xiaoya nodded at her and forced a smile on her cold face. "Jojo, long time no see." Wei Ziqin was brought to Arbor by Lightning and the others. Only then did Xiao Mu release her grip on Xiao En and carelessly wipe her bloody hands on her skirt. She then tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, are you okay?" "Silly child, what could happen to mother?" Wei Ziqin looked at her daughter and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. "Then let's go." Arbor nodded. "Father, father." Xiao En crawled a few steps forward and crawled to Xiao Zhongde's side in a sorry state. "Kill her, kill this lunatic." "Father! Father!" Arbor abruptly turned his head, and a ferocious glint flashed across his eyes. He stepped forward and stepped on Xiao En. "Hey, Jojo, Jojo." Xiao Lu's aunt hurriedly cried out and carefully soothed her emotions. "You should let Miss Xiao En go. After all, we are all family members." Arbor sent Joni flying with a kick, and she landed in front of her father with a bang. Xiao Donghua was so angry that his entire body trembled. Arbor, from today onwards, your name is removed from the clan. You are no longer a member of the Qiao family. Qin Guelu knitted his brows. Wei Zichin's body trembled. She turned around abruptly and roared, "Qiao Dongbua! What right do you have? How dare you?" They actually wanted to remove her daughter from the clan. How could a girl whose name was removed from the list still have a good reputation? Was he trying to force her young lady to die? Look at what your girl has done. Bitch! Xiao Zhongde roared angrily as he bent down to support his trembling daughter, Qiao Enai. Look at what she's done to Qiao Enai. Bitch! Removed from the list. She should be removed from the list. Family head Qiao, you better think carefully before you act. Omega Kotoku glanced coldly at Xiao Dongbua, and the iciness in her eyes made Xiao Dongbua shudder involuntarily. Xiao Dongbua didn't sincerely want to remove Arbor from the list. He was eager to bring such a talented little evildoer back to the Qiao family. But now, he was quite enraged by Arbor's resolute attitude. Since he couldn't obtain such a talent, he would destroy this little girl at all costs. Sir Qin, this is our Qiao estate's family matter. Please don't interfere, Xiao Dongbua said, and he turned to shout at Arbor, Arbor, do you know your crime? Chapter 889. You know your old mother's crime, idiot. Arbor said indifferently, your Qiao family has already started to rot from the bones. You can take a look at the things you've raised and see for yourself what kind of good-for-nothing things you've raised. I wouldn't want such a rotten and disgusting family even if you gave it to me. Arbor reached out to support his mother and coldly glanced back at them. Why are you vermin the Qiao family's main family? Are you qualified? Look at your ugly faces, each one of you thinks your faces are bigger than the sun. What a joke. My Arbor father and mother, from today onwards, will open their own family ancestral hall and write their own genealogy. They will break away from your rotten family. Xiao Zhongbang is the Qiao family's first family head. As for you, you're a bunch of little reptiles who are only fit to live in dark corners. You'll be like flies and dogs for your entire life, and in the end, you'll be replaced by the new Qiao family. Wei Zichin's eyes widened slightly as she looked up at her daughter. Such a dazzling little girl, yet at this moment, her body seemed to be burning like a blazing sun. The color was so bright and translucent that it was almost impossible for everyone to look directly at her. Second Do's pupils constricted, and he subconsciously clenched his fingers tightly. Suddenly, Second Young Master Do felt his sleeves move, and he turned to look at his older brother. Seeing his older brother's slightly inquiring gaze, a sense of powerlessness surfaced in Second Do's heart in a split second. He was a smart person, so he could clearly feel eldest Miss Qiao's hostility toward the Do family. It was a terrifying thing to have such an enemy who was rapidly growing. Perhaps he should go back and sort out his thoughts. Then, he would find an opportunity to ask Miss Qiao how the Do family had offended her. Child. Wei Zichin's eyes were dyed with a layer of moisture, and she reached out to gently pull her daughter into her embrace. Let's go home. Slut. Xiao Zhongde pointed at the backs of Wei Zichin and her daughter as he angrily reprimanded, don't come back after leaving the Qiao family. You think being expelled from the family is a glorious thing? Soon, you'll experience how many people will ridicule you for being expelled from the family. Boom. The door of the Qiao estate, which was already in tatters, was completely smashed into pieces by the violent impact. 3,000 heavily armored dragon saliva guards quickly surrounded the entire Qiao residence under Yu Xiu's lead. The swarm of soldiers ran into the Qiao residence in unison, splitting into several groups and rushing into the front hall and back rooms in a well-trained manner, quickly taking control of the various forces. If anyone resists, they will be punished for the crime of disrespect and executed on the spot. A cold voice came from outside the house, filled with a murderous aura. Mo Lian's tall figure walked out of the broken door. He saw Jojo at first glance and hurried to Arbor's side. Mo Lien. It was only at this moment that Xiao Mu's taut nerves relaxed slightly. She also quickly ran over and was pulled into the man's embrace. Jojo, are you okay? Mo Lien saw that she was covered in blood, and his heart couldn't help but beat faster. He anxiously grabbed her small hand and looked her up and down. I'm fine. It's all that idiot Xiao Ni's blood. It was only now that Xiao Mu looked up at him, feeling aggrieved. Mo Lien, they captured my mother, yet I'm not allowed to retaliate. Chapter 890. They said that I was cruel to Qiao Ni and removed my name from the Qiao family's genealogy. I don't care. Arbor stubbornly says with red eyes, I'll have my father build his own ancestral hall. In the future, I'll be the rightful eldest miss of the Qiao family. What do you say? Lien. Arbor buries himself in her chest, making a muffled sound. Good. A trace of ruthlessness flits through Mo Lien's eyes. She looks up at Xiao Dongbua and the others and roars, where are the crown prince's personal attendants? Xiao Mu leaned against his side and reached out to hug his waist, nuzzling her small head into his embrace. She could clearly feel the man's breathing quickening. That was the blood that was burning due to his anger gradually heating up. Boom! Over 100 personal attendants stepped forward, raising the sabers in their hands and shouting in unison, present. The capital's Qiao family has arrested the Marchioness for no reason. They have committed a great crime of disrespect to the crown princess. Everyone in the capital's Qiao family is to be detained. Wait for the Supreme Court's approval. What? Xiao Dongbua's entire body trembles. Just as he's about to resist, he hears the crown prince's icy voice ring out, if there's resistance, regardless of gender or age. Kill them on the spot. The Qiao family's children immediately cry out. Xiao Dongbua's shoulders instantly slump, his hands loosening as a guard presses a set of mystic energy shackles on him. His eyes are red as he says angrily, Your Highness. You can't do this. Your Highness. If you don't want the Qiao family's close to 300 people to all die, die. Then shut up for us. Mo Lien coldly sweeps a glance at Xiao Dongbua, leaving behind a sentence that makes everyone in the Qiao family tremble in fear, You're already no longer us wife's clansmen. There's no need for us to be polite to you. Xiao Zhongde immediately goes limp on the ground. His previous clamoring and cursing all seemed so petty and laughable. A tiny Qiao family wanting to oppose the powerful imperial court is undoubtedly like striking a rock with an egg. They'll die without an intact corpse. In a split second, the sounds of people being arrested, berated, and beaten mixed together. I only want Mom to live a bit more comfortably, Xiao Mu said dryly as she snuggled up to Mo Lien in low spirits. Don't worry, they won't have the chance to do anything to Mother. Mo Lien sent the mother and daughter back to the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate. Wei Ziqin and her daughter were whispering in the car. When I first saw Qiao Laolu and sister-in-law, I was also shocked. Wei Ziqin held her daughter's small hand and told her in detail what happened after she was kidnapped to the Qiao family. Xiao Dongbua didn't make things difficult for me. I even asked the doctor to treat my wounds. Wei Ziqin shook her head and said, he probably didn't even think that you would have such a huge reaction and almost overturned the entire Qiao estate. They said that they wanted me to stay with the main family for a period of time. So they specifically asked sixth sister-in-law to accompany me. When I saw Lao Lu and sister-in-law's family, I was genuinely happy. Sigh, but I didn't expect that the two of them were helping Xiao Dongbua persuade me to stay. They even wanted me to persuade you to return to the main family. Wei Ziqin shook her head, not knowing what to say. After all, so many years had passed, and people's hearts were fickle. It wasn't strange that Lao Lu and sixth sister-in-law had changed because of the ways of the world. Previously, she had asked the husband and wife how they had survived all these years and how they had come to the main family. The two of them were silent and didn't intend to tell her at all. Wei Ziqin saw that the two of them had grown distant with her and didn't treat her as one of their own, so she didn't ask anymore. Chapter 891. Xiaoya used to be a child who loved to smile, but now, she was abnormally cold when they met. Wei Ziqin felt that even her smile toward her was a bit forced. After all, they were old neighbors of Quoto village. Seeing them become so unfamiliar, Wei Ziqin didn't feel very good. "Mom, don't think so much." Arbor was rather open-minded as she held her mother's hand and said, "There are some changes that we can't stop no matter what." Wei Ziqin wiped the corners of her eyes and nodded. She was just a bit regretful. Mother and daughter returned to the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate under Prince Mo's escort. Just as they got off the carriage, they were stopped by a series of loud shouts. Wei Ziqin and Arbor paused and turned to look. They saw the great king's steward eunuch, Gong Chang'an, striding over to them on his short, chubby legs. "This old servant greets the crown prince and crown princess." "Marchioness." Gong Chang'an wiped his sweat and panted heavily. Only the heavens knew that he had rushed to the Qiao estate's main residence to deliver the great king's verbal edict to the crown princess, only to end up empty-handed. Afterwards, he could only bitterly rush back to the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate, and only then did he manage to intercept the crown princess. Mo Lien glanced at him coldly. "What are you doing here?" Gong Chang'an was a shrewd old man. The moment he heard the crown prince's clearly displeased tone, he knew that things were going to be bad. However, he was burdened with the damned mission that the great king had given him, so he had no choice but to brace himself and face the crown prince. He said obsequiously, Your Highness, this old servant is here on the great king's orders. He urgently summons the crown princess to the palace for an audience." Urgently summons? How urgent did it have to be to make Gong Chang'an, this old fellow, sweat profusely? Prince Mo coolly swept the old eunuch a glance. "What's the matter? What's the hurry? Tomorrow. Jojo needs to go back and rest." Gong Chang'an immediately knelt on the ground with a plop, "Your Highness. The great king is urgently summoning the crown princess. This matter cannot be delayed. If this old servant fails to bring the crown princess back to the palace, woo-woo." This old man actually cried as he wiped his face with tears streaming down his face. Crown Prince Mo pursed his lips tightly, his expression displeased. Arbor didn't care. He tugged at Mo Lien's sleeve and said, "Forget it, don't make things difficult for him. It won't take long for me to follow him into the palace." While they were talking, Father Chiao, who had gone to the capital office to report the case, happened to return. Accompanying him was the capital governor. The two hurriedly dismounted and went forward to greet the crown prince. When Lord Pang saw that Wei Ziqin was safe and sound, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief and repeatedly congratulated her. "Lord Pang, the suspects have all been taken into custody by the Supreme Court. I'll need you to follow up on this matter." Mo Lien instructed indifferently. "Of course. Don't worry, Your Highness." Arbor comforted his mother with a few words and had his parents return home first. He followed the crown prince into the palace. On the way, Mo Lien's brows were tightly knitted. Seeing this, the little fellow couldn't help but frown as well. She reached out to stroke his brows. Mo Lien snapped out of his daze and saw her adorable action. He couldn't help but chuckle and hold her little hand. "You really don't want me to go with you?" "No need." Arbor twisted his little hand and reached out two fingers, one on the left and one on the right, to smooth out the frown between his brows. Mo Lien burst into laughter. Arbor tilted his head and suddenly asked, "Mo Lien, can your father take a beating?" Gong Chang'an, who was sitting on the shaft of the carriage, didn't know why he heard the crown princess's words, but his heart froze for no reason. Chapter 892. The crown princess has arrived. The great King Mo Lei, who was pacing back and forth in front of the main hall, suddenly perked up. He straightened his posture and turned around with a cold expression. Arbor greets the great king. Arbor walked into the spacious main hall without consulting anyone and performed a standard salute in the great king's direction. Mo Lei's lips curled into a smile as he stared sharply at the girl in front of him. He suddenly asked, "Crown Princess, do you know why we summoned you here so urgently?" Arbor looked up and returned the great king's gaze with neither servility nor arrogance. She just stood there quietly and didn't say anything, only waiting for the great king to continue speaking. Mo Lei simply had nowhere to vent his anger. As expected, his old wife's nagging wasn't wrong. Facing this expressionless stoic face, he didn't know why his mood started to sour. "Do you know that back then, it was the crown prince who begged us and knelt for 3 days and 3 nights without getting up? Only then did us obtain the position of crown princess for you. Otherwise, with your status, there's no way you can become the crown princess." Arbor directly swept a glance at the great king. "What are you bragging about? Would Mo Yen do such a cowardly thing? He should be the one who took the written imperial edict and asked you to directly knock it on the table." The great king was so angry that he was jumping up and down. Nonsense. He was already about to explode from anger on the inside. This son of his was indeed a swindler. He actually said everything to his wife. He made his father lose face in front of his daughter-in-law. Isn't that so? Darling Qiao was angry and said whatever was on her mind. That night, he told me himself that I'm already an adult. We have to settle the marriage before the coming-of-age ceremony. Marriage isn't scary. It's just a formality. In the future, we'll be husband and wife. The great king's eyes bulged. Was this how his son tricked a little girl? What formality? Marriage is just a formality, Then, that night, he entered the palace to ask you for the imperial edict. The more darling Qiao spoke, the angrier she became. She glared at the great king and said, "You big liar." He even said that he would kneel for 3 days and 3 nights. He hadn't even been in the palace for 2 hours when the imperial edict came down. "Don't you remember what you've done?" The old great king really couldn't remember. But it was really embarrassing to be exposed by her daughter-in-law like this. Furthermore, what liar? He was the great king. Preposterous. I summoned you here today to tell you. The old great king flung his sleeves angrily and said, "It's not easy for you to get the status of crown princess. You should cherish it. Look at all the trouble you've caused recently. Even the crown prince's reputation has been tarnished by you." Gong Chang'an followed behind the great king and carefully reached out to tug at the great king's sleeve, indicating for the great king to look at the crown princess's darkened expression. "Although our Sikong planet's folkways are more ferocious. But as the crown princess, you must uphold your morals and scrupulously abide by a woman's duty. You mustn't easily get into a fight with others over trivial matters. Now, you even went so far as to destroy your own family. You have to trouble the crown prince to step forward and resolve your troubles every time. Crown princess, I'm warning you seriously. If there's a next time and you damage the crown prince's reputation, I'll definitely." Smack. Suddenly, a blue immobilization talisman was abruptly stuck to the great king's forehead, instantly causing a certain someone's gesticulating hand to freeze in midair. The great king's face was petrified. Chapter 893. Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness the Crown Prince, it's bad. The junior eunuch sent by Gong Chang and ran into the Eastern Palace in a panic and looked around the empty palace. The junior royal maid from the Eastern Palace followed in and said with a fierce expression, "I already said that His Highness isn't in the bedchamber. How dare you barge in here? Where did His Highness go?" The junior eunuch was about to cry. This servant was sent by Manager Gong. This servant earnestly requests that His Highness make a trip to the king's palace. The junior royal maid pursed her lips. How can we, as servants, care where the master goes? You can just report the truth to Manager Gong. The junior eunuch said with a sullen expression, this servant has an extremely urgent matter to report to His Highness. The great king is still waiting for His Highness to return and rescue him. What happened to the great king? Hui Feng couldn't pretend that he didn't hear anything anymore, so he appeared next to the junior eunuch and asked with an indifferent expression. Wah! The junior eunuch wiped his tears and said, the great king has been immobilized in the main hall by Her Highness the Crown Princess with an immobilization talisman. Even now, he still can't move. It was almost dusk, and it was almost time to light the lanterns for dinner, but the great king was still immobilized in the main hall in the same posture. Only now did the great king himself start to panic. Gong Chang and quickly ordered someone to invite His Highness the Crown Prince to resolve this urgent matter. At this moment, the Crown Prince was hiding in the bedchamber's secret room and crafting a golem by hand. Combined with some guidance from the Tianji treasure blueprint, the Crown Prince's improved golem was more agile and nimble than before. Moreover, this golem could already start learning some simple mystic techniques and was about the level of a normal level 4 or level 5 mystic cultivator. This was a great leap in golem crafting. If he wanted to create a golem above level 10 mystic cultivator, he still needed to study it continuously. When Prince Mo heard Huifeng's report, he buried himself in his work and didn't even look up. I didn't hit him, I only stuck an immobilization talisman on him. He'll be able to move when the time is up, so what's the rush? Huifeng's mouth twitched as he silently lit a candle for the old great king in his heart. Look at this troublesome son of his. How biased was his heart? He had long known that the great king would definitely come to his eastern palace to ask for reinforcements, so he had entered the secret chamber early in the morning to slack off. Your Highness, do you think we should go to the king's palace to express our sincerity? The crown prince aloofly glanced at Huifeng. Jojo merely stuck an immobilization talisman on him. I think it's just right to give him a basin of ice water to cool down. This great king had nothing better to do, so he kept bothering his wife. I won't read the memorials for the next 2 days. Send them to the great king. The crown prince snorted. I think he has too much free time. An hour later, Huifeng brought back the latest news from the king's palace. The crown princess ordered servants to set up a small table and started eating dinner in front of the petrified great king. Mo Lian's slender hands abruptly paused in the middle of fiddling with the golem, but she then continued working as if nothing had happened. When fourth Princess Mo Shuang arrived, she saw this scene. The woman known as the crown prince consort was eating slowly in front of the king, who was standing stiffly in front of him. Royal father. Royal father. Mo Shuang made a big fuss as she walked forward. She first hugged the great king's leg and wailed bitterly, as if the great king had died. The old great king's expression looked as if he had eaten shit. If he could move right now, he would probably kick this daughter out of the hall. After Mo Shuang finished crying, she abruptly turned around and glared viciously at Arbor. Chapter 894. How dare you use witchcraft to harm the great king? Guards, guards. Gong Chang and hastily walked up with a long face and hastily waved his hand. Fourth princess, don't cause trouble here. Hurry and return first. Fourth Princess Mo Shuang was enraged. Gong Chang, how dare you chase this princess out? Gong Chang really wanted to cry. He was clearly protecting his master loyally and doing all of this for the princess's sake. How could the princess be a match for the crown princess with such a dumb brain? You still dare to make a fuss here? The crown princess will teach you a lesson in a bit. Fourth Princess Mo Shuang walked to Arbor's table with a dark expression. She stretched out her leg and looked like she was about to kick over her small table, but Arbor pressed down with one hand and firmly gripped the table. You! Mo Shuang was enraged, but she couldn't resist Arbor's heavy pressure. She loosened her grip and staggered back a few steps, her eyes bulging as she cursed, as expected of a bold woman. She dares to be so impudent in the great king's palace. Gong Changpan. Gong Changpan walked to the fourth princess with a bitter expression. Princess, you had better return first. No, I have something important to report to royal father. Mo Shuang grabbed Gong Changpan's collar and angrily said, hurry and have this woman dispel the witchcraft for the great king. Gong Changpan's expression became even more bitter. Your Highness, are you joking? Her Highness the Crown Princess even dares to discipline the great king, let alone a lowly servant like me. What use would I be if I went up? Wouldn't I be sending a lamb to the tiger's den? Mo Shuang turned her head and glared at Arbor, but she couldn't do anything about it. Seeing this crown princess leisurely eating without even looking up, Mo Shuang felt a bit stifled. She was clearly the princess of the golden branch in jade leaves, all right. Why could this crown princess be so much more unscrupulous than her, a princess? Another incense stick of time passed. The corner of Huifeng's mouth twitched as he ran back and reported the latest battle situation to His Highness the Crown Prince. The great king can finally move. He just called the secret guards to arrest the crown princess and interrogate her. Unexpectedly, the crown princess flicked her sleeve and took out handfuls of blue body immobilization talismans. She whispered to the great king, here are 100 body securing talismans. One talisman will secure you for 2 hours. How many days do you think you will have to eat dirt in this hall if I use them on you? Mo Lien was stunned for a moment before laughing out loud. This was indeed something that his Jojo would do. What happened next? The great king sent the steward eunuch, Gong Chang'an, to respectfully escort the crown princess out of the palace. It said that when Gong Chang'an left, he ran faster than a rabbit, practically sending off the crown princess as if he was sending off the god of plague. Huifeng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That was true. He summoned the crown princess to the king's palace in all seriousness for a lecture, but the great king was inexplicably punished to stand for 2 hours. In any case, the great king must be feeling very tired right now, right? Mo Lien walked out of the secret room with a hearty laugh and was full of praises. I'm relieved that Jojo didn't suffer any losses. Here, I'll go see royal father right now. Crown Prince, can you be any more deceitful? Huifeng looked up at the sky speechlessly. Your Highness, I think it's best if you don't go over right now. The great king is currently in a terrible rage and reprimanding the fourth princess. Why did she enter the palace? Prince Mo's brows involuntarily creased at the mention of fourth sister Mo Shuang. The fourth princess entered the palace to beg for a consort. What? Crown Prince Mo momentarily thought that he had misheard. Wait. I haven't finished yet, it's not early today. Chapter 895. The fourth princess came to the palace to beg for a prince consort. Huifeng rolled his eyes and repeated his words. Beg for what prince consort? Mo Lien frowned and paused in her steps. This Mo Shuang married the Marquis of Su An's estate's old third 7 years ago, but she was unwilling to be left alone after the marriage. She brought a gigolo home every few days and quarreled with the prince consort all day long, which ultimately led to a peaceful divorce. In the end, she refused to let the prince consort off and forced him to his death. Her conduct was simply shameless. Mo Lien disdained to speak with her, so she didn't pay much attention to this woman's affairs. Huifeng grinned as if he had heard an interesting piece of news. He cheerfully said to Mo Lien, the fourth princess begged the great king to bestow the Qin estate's eldest young master to her as her prince consort. The great king rained down a torrent of abuse on the fourth princess, ha ha ha. Who? Mo Lien truly thought that she was hearing things. Who was his crippled idiot fourth sister, who didn't have a trace of mystic energy and couldn't lift a single thing, thinking about? Cough, this subordinate also knows that it's rather inconceivable. But the princess claimed that she was immediately stunned by eldest young Master Qin after seeing him at the New Year's banquet 2 days ago. After missing him for 2 days, she couldn't bear the loneliness and ran into the palace to beg the great king to bestow a marriage upon her. Ha 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 ha. Mo Lien actually laughed maniacally. When Hui Feng saw that such a trivial matter had actually amused his master, he was immediately amused as well. He simply leaned forward and vividly described what he had seen and heard in the king's palace. Your Highness, you don't know. The fourth princess hugged the great king's leg and was dragged by the great king to wipe the floor, but she refused to let go. She cried and yelled that she had to have the great king bestow a marriage upon her and bestow the Qin estate's eldest young master to her as her prince consort. She even said, "Cough. If this daughter can't marry Mr. Qin and receive his nourishment, this daughter will definitely wither and wither like winter vegetation. This daughter will die." Hui Feng stifled the anger in his throat as he shouted this. Mo Lien was startled for a moment before she started laughing maniacally. In the dead of the night, the moon hung above the trees. In Crane Garden. When Second Qin heard the messenger's report, he curled his lips into a rare mischievous smile. That's great. That's good, then perhaps I'll have a princess sister-in-law in the future. Who told him to flirt with flirtatiousness? Look, who did he flirt? What was my eldest brother's reaction? The man was about 27 or 28 years old and had an honest look on his face. He respectfully lowered his head and said, "Eldest young master didn't have much of a reaction when he heard the news. He was just stunned for a moment before he smiled and said that there was no need to worry about it." On the other hand, Miss Ping, from eldest young master's court was very angry. She cursed at fourth princess behind closed doors and even smashed quite a few things. Omega Kotoku pursed her lips and nodded absent-mindedly. "Wang Chung, have you done what I asked you to do?" Reporting to master, Wang Chung has done it. Omega Kotoku nodded slowly. She gripped her cup and icily said, "If it's mine, then it definitely can't escape." Wang Chung stole a glance at his master. He felt like his master's dark and serene eyes seemed to flicker with the water of a frigid pond, as sharp and piercing as an icy precipice. Wang Chung didn't dare to look any longer and quickly lowered his head. Omega Kotoku waved her hand at him, and Wang Chung silently disappeared. That night, Blue Mountain Courtyard's maidservant Xiang Yuanyuan was feverish and muddle-headed from the fever, alarming manager Kai Wei. Chapter 896. After Arbor returned home safe and sound, she first reported to her parents before washing up and going to bed. She felt exhausted from today's torment, so she fell asleep the moment she laid down on the bed. Early the next morning, Arbor was informed of Duan Yu's visit as soon as she got up. Duan Yu, this guy, must have come because of yesterday's incident. Arbor wiped her face, changed into a set of clothes, and ran to the main hall to see him. As soon as she entered, she saw that guy pacing back and forth in the hall with his hands behind his back. "Duan Yu," Arbor called out softly in a crisp voice. The young man turned around, and the moment he saw her, his pair of peach blossom eyes suddenly lit up. "Jojo, are you all right? Did you get hurt?" Duan Yu looked at her anxiously and asked, "I heard that you were summoned into the palace by the old great king after returning yesterday. What did he do to you? Reprimanded? Punished? Of course it's fine." Arbor pursed her lips. When she recalled the great king's sullen expression yesterday, she wanted to laugh on the inside. Mo Lien's father was just a bit lustful, muddle-headed, and lazy, but there was nothing else. She was just playing a harmless joke on the old man, so she didn't know how traumatized the old man was. "I just knew that Jojo would be fine," Duan Yu said happily. Duan Yu cheerfully exclaimed as he reached out to grab her sleeve. "Oh Yu, why did you barge into the Chiao family's residence by yourself? You should have at least dragged me along." I can also join in the fun, right? Arbor nodded. All right then, I'll call you if there's a fight next time. That's right. Duan Yu nodded with a grin. Jojo. Do you have any activities for the Lantern Festival? I heard there will be a Lantern Festival that day, so let's go together. Lantern viewing. Arbor was dispirited. MHM, apparently there's no curfew that night. We can play until very late. Duan Yu looked at her with blinking eyes. It's very fun. There will be people weaving in and out, praying and releasing lanterns, and all kinds of activities. How about we go and have some fun together? Yay! 2 cheers suddenly sounded. Sister, let's go play. Jolin and Jonathan suddenly popped out of the door and ran excitedly to Arbor. The little monk followed behind them and looked at Arbor with sparkling eyes. Benefactress, is the Lantern Festival that fun? When he used to live in a temple, he would only celebrate festivals with his teacher and father. He had never seen a lantern festival before. He had never seen such a lively and bustling scene. Arbor waved at the small monk. The little monk pattered over to her and raised his little head to look at her. Benefactress? Kong, you really want to go? The little monk tilted his head and thought for a while. In the end, he nodded heavily and said, I want to go. Master had said that monks should not lie. Yes, he was an honest man. Arbor patted Kong's head. All right, let's go together. All right. Duan Yu's mouth twitched. He didn't expect to have to drag along 3 little radishes. Jojo, 10 days after the Lantern Festival, the 8 great patrician families will hold a competition between disciples below the age of 20 and above the age of 13. Can you come and watch the competition then? Arbor turned to look at Duan Yu. I will participate in the competition. The Qiao family that represented the new generation. Duan Yu immediately jumped up in excitement. Really? Then you must properly beat up those little monkeys from the Duan family for me. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 897. The two were chatting animatedly when Chunying hurried over with 2 maidservants. She curtsied when she saw Arbor and Duan Yu. Miss, young Master Duan. Is something the matter? If it wasn't, Chunying wouldn't purposely interrupt her conversation with Duan Yu. Yes. Apologies, miss, there's someone outside who claims to be the Marquis of Su An's estate's 5th young master, Hu Yukong. He's been clamoring for Miss to compensate for the medicinal soup and insists on staying in our estate, saying he wants Miss to personally tend to his injuries. Our people chased him away twice, but he refused to leave. At this time, he's already attracted a lot of onlookers. This servant didn't handle it properly and had no choice but to come and inform Miss, Chunying said apologetically. Duan Yu clenched his fists when he heard this. Hu Yukong, is it? This young master will go and meet him. I'll pay him for the medicine and serve him the medicine. Arbor couldn't help but find it funny and tugged at his belt. It's nothing. It's just a person with a bad brain that I met yesterday. I'll go out and take a look. I'll go too. Duan Yu was afraid that Arbor would be taken advantage of, so he quickly followed. Xiao Lin and Xiao Sen exchanged glances before quickly running out with the little monk. Who was it? Did they eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall to come find trouble with their eldest sister? Didn't they know that their eldest sister was someone who could even backstab the great king? From sister's words, it seems like it's someone we met at Spring Dawn Garden yesterday. Xiao Lin blinked. Wow! It can't be that fool whose head was smashed by sister with a flower pot, right? Xiao Sen suddenly exclaimed. When Duan Yu heard this, he knew that there must be some marvelous story behind it. He quickly took out melon seeds, peanuts, and candies from his inner world and peddled them to the 2 brats to inquire about yesterday's events. After the Qiao Lin siblings each grabbed a handful of melon seeds and peanuts, they couldn't close their small mouths and poured out yesterday's events to Duan Yu. Arbor didn't care about what those people were muttering behind her. She directly walked to the door, and as soon as she walked out of the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate, she saw that oddball old fifth of the Marquis of Su An's estate rolling on the ground as he stubbornly held on to the heels of her father, Qiao Zhongbang. Qiao Zhongbang had an awkward expression on his face. He didn't know whether he should kick him flying with his heel or continue dragging him forward. "What are you doing?" Arbor looked at Hu Yukong speechlessly. When the latter saw her, his eyes quickly lit up. Then, he pointed at his own head and wailed, "Look at my head. It was smashed by you yesterday. The doctor said that something might go wrong. I don't care, you have to be responsible for my treatment. Otherwise, I'll just lie in front of your Marquis of Jiayuan's estate." Arbor gazed deeply at him. That gaze caused Hu Yukong to involuntarily shrink back, feeling somewhat guilty for no reason. Oh, she smashed his head with a flower pot yesterday, and now he's shamelessly sticking to her door. Duan Yu rolled up his sleeves and was about to step forward. "I think that doctor was right. It's not that something might go wrong, but that something is wrong with you right now." "What could go wrong with me?" Hu Yukong was paralyzed on the ground as he swept a disdainful gaze at Duan Yu. "Something wrong with your head. Come, come. I'll treat you." Duan Yu was about to step forward as he spoke. Hu Yukong rolled on the ground and hugged Qiao Zhongbang's heels as he wailed, "Marquis, Marquis, murder. Marquis, someone wants to kill someone." Qiao Zhongbang restrained himself and abruptly used a bit of force to pull out his feet. Chapter 898. Stop making a fuss. Arbor shouted impatiently and waved her small hand at the two boy servants behind her. "Help him up." "Yes, Mississippi." The two servants quickly went up to support him. However, Hu Yukong refused to let go of Qiao Zhongbang's heel and even howled, "What are you doing? Don't touch me. I said don't touch me. Damn it, a bunch of lowly servants, how dare you touch your Lord Hu? Lord Marquis, save me, Lord Marquis." Qiao Zhongbang was truly embarrassed to death. "Sorry to trouble this young master Hu, can you not embarrass yourself in front of the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate? If he was this young master Hu's father, he would probably want to tear him apart. How did the Hu family produce such an oddball son?" Scram. Qiao Zhongbang sincerely forced this word out from between his teeth. How could he have known that he would be so unlucky? He was just about to head to the capital governor's office, but this oddball would pester him as soon as he stepped out of the gates. "I don't care. You must compensate." Hu Yukong argued forcefully, "You smashed my head. You must compensate me for my medical expenses and serve me wholeheartedly until I recover." Arbor suddenly smiled at him. This smile made Duan Yu's hair stand on end. What was going on? Why did his Jojo keep giggling foolishly at strange men? There was something wrong with this situation. "Jojo, you aren't really going to take in this mentally ill guy, right?" Duan Yu grabbed her small hand and earnestly dissuaded her, "You mustn't. Look at how shameless he is, he clearly wants to cling to you. We don't even know what his motive is, so you mustn't bother with him. You'll lose if you nag at him." "You're right." Arbor turned and nodded seriously at Duan Yu. After Duan Yu heaved a sigh of relief, he glanced over and saw the little girl leaping down the steps. She ran directly to Hu Yukong and yanked him down from her father's heels. Qiao Zhongbang let out a long sigh and hurriedly took a few steps back. He then looked at Hu Yukong suspiciously. "This kid looks like a weakling." But just now, when he used all his strength to pull his heel, he actually couldn't pull it out. "Miss Qiao, the cost of the medicine cannot be reduced by a single cent." Hu Yukong was pulled over by her, and he grumbled. "What the hell are you talking about?" Arbor slapped Hu Yukong's big head. Everyone's mouths twitched, and he rushed over. He grabbed Hu Yokong's face with his two small hands and ravaged it. Stop pretending. I know who you are. You must be Snake Beauty. Don't think that I won't be able to recognize you just because you've disguised yourself as the idiot of the Marquis of Su An's estate. Arbor kneaded and knocked on his face, directly treating his opponent's face like a glutinous rice ball. Hu Yokong's face became distorted in front of everyone. He grimaced in a strange manner and forced himself to say, more rebellious. Stop pinching, I'll let you pretend. Arbor punched Hu Yokong's chin. Grabbing his jet black hair, he punched the same spot 3 times in a row. Then, he took a closer look and muttered curiously, why isn't it dented? If the person in front of her was Snake Beauty, there would be a flaw exposed by shifting his form, twisting his bones, twisting his meridians, and violently punching the same spot, right? Could it be that she was overthinking it? Duan Yu truly sympathized with this Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth. He raised his hand to cover his face, simply at a loss for words. Chapter 899. Xiao Sen and Xiao Lin each had their mouths agape, and it took a long time before they continued to munch on melon seeds. This guy who had his head smashed by a flower pot yesterday was truly quite miserable, and today, he was beaten to this state by Sister. Arbor loosened her grip and carefully examined his chin. It didn't look like he had moved his bones anywhere. You really aren't the Snake Beauty? Arbor suspiciously glanced at the Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth. She kept feeling that this person was a bit strange. Logically speaking, with his submissive personality, it was unlikely that he would dare to come find trouble with her. Even if he didn't know her before yesterday, it seemed like someone had already informed him of the Crown Princess's identity when she smashed his head. Someone like Hu Yukong, who didn't even dare to let out a fart when he saw His Highness the Crown Prince, still dared to come find the Crown Princess to quarrel. Cough. Arbor awkwardly loosened her grip. Just as she was about to reach out to straighten his disheveled collar, the Marquis of Su An's estate's fifth young master shrunk back with all his might and let out a tragic shriek. Don't come over, what are you doing? He covered his chest with both hands, and his eyes were wide as saucers. When he looked at Arbor, even Arbor couldn't resist looking down at her pair of spotlessly white hands. She really didn't want to do anything. Arbor coughed lightly and glanced at Hu Yukong in embarrassment. It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Young Master Hu, are you all right? Hu Yukong shrunk his neck and covered his chest as he shouted vehemently, you smashed my head yesterday. Today, you hit my chin hard. Tomorrow, you want to break my nose crooked. The day after tomorrow, you want to beat my eyes until they're bloodshot. Arbor twitched her mouth, and she quickly reached out to placate him. No, no, no. Don't come over. Young Master Hu shrunk back like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Our dear Arbor's hand froze in mid-air just like that. On the other end, Duan Yu was already laughing uncontrollably. He held his forehead and turned his handsome face away, practically unable to bear looking directly at Hu Yokong's tragic and shocked face. How about this? I'll give you a bottle of healing pills. Take it and you'll be fine in 2 days. Give it to me. Hu Yukong angrily reprimanded him. Arbor was speechless, but he still took out a bottle of pills from his inner world and handed it to him. Hu Yukong hurriedly snatched it over, opened the bottle and sniffed it. Only then did his expression soften slightly as he muttered, the medicinal pills are not bad. Xiao Mu nodded. Then let's call it quits like this. No. Hu Yokong's expression was extremely ugly. You have to be responsible for treating my injuries. Otherwise, I wouldn't have left the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate. Even if this matter is reported to the great king, you will still be the one at fault. Arbor. Xiao Zhongbang quickly stepped forward to smooth things over. How about this, young Master Hu? You go home first. No. Hu Yukong clutched his chest at once, looking like he was about to faint from suffocation. Don't think of chasing me out of the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate before my injuries recover. Arbor's head hurt from his quarreling, and he turned to Chunying to instruct, arrange for him to stay in the outer courtyard. In at most 3 days, his small injuries will be healed. Humph. Hu Yukong pursed his lips. When he followed the disdainful Chunying into the Marquis' estate's main entrance, he secretly peeked at Arbor's back. Why did you bring this person into the estate? Duan Yu asked unhappily. He couldn't even enter the inner courtyard, so who was this person so thick-skinned? Chapter 900. Arbor looked around before secretly pulling Duan Yu to the side and whispering, I suspect that there's something strange about this person. Did you just call him a snake beauty? Who is that? Duan Yu also couldn't resist asking in a hushed voice. A pervert. Arbor harumphed. A fellow that I especially want to beat up whenever I see her. Duan Yu's mouth twitched before he said with certainty, that person must be especially ugly. Unlike him, who was likable because of his good looks. Arbor nodded, and the two of them huddled together and muttered for a while. Xiao Zhongbang wanted to laugh as he watched from behind, so he coughed and said, Jojo, Dad is going to the capital governor's office and will return at noon. Arbor turned to look at Xiao Zhongbang. He knew that Dad must be going to follow up on the Qiao clan's matter, so he nodded and watched him leave. Jojo, then we'll make an appointment. I'll come pick you up in a few nights. After Duan Yu left with a wave of his paw, Arbor sent the 3 little radishes back to the estate and went to beautiful Vista Court to talk with her mother. It just so happened that her mother had finished giving out some orders and was free. When she saw her walking over, she happily waved at her. Jojo, you came at the right time. Mom just wanted to talk to you about something. What is it, Mom? Wei Ziqin pulled her daughter's hand and sat down on the side. Didn't the Qiao clan all go to jail? From Xiao Mo's words, it seems that they want to banish all of them from the capital. Mom was thinking that old 6th Qiao's family was implicated for no reason. I don't know if there's any way to bail them out. The Supreme Court hasn't passed a verdict yet. There's no verdict yet, Arbor said dryly. Mom, banishment isn't Mo Lian's idea, it's mine. I want all these people to disappear from my sight. Wei Ziqin's heart tightened. Then what about your grandmother? Arbor was expressionless. Does Dad also want to bail elderly lady out? Arbor didn't want to make himself feel wronged. This old lady was not much different from her previous life. She caused trouble all day long. Now that she had become like this, she could only blame herself. Alas. Wei Ziqin sighed. Although your grandmother disappointed your father, she was still your father's mother. Forget it, you don't have to worry about this matter. Let your father handle it himself. Arbor nodded noncommittally. Is there any way to get Xiao Laolu and his family out? Wei Ziqin asked again. If they don't have a place to stay, we can. Mom. Arbor shook his mother's hand. Don't worry about it. Don't even think about going through the trouble of bringing her back. A few years ago, you brought an old lady home to serve you all day long. Aren't you tired? Now, he had to get some clan relatives back to entertain them. After all, many years had passed, and it was hard to tell what was in a person's heart. It's not suitable for Qiao Laolu and his family of 3 to stay in our residence. Wei Ziqin glanced at her daughter and sighed helplessly. Daughter, we've been neighbors with your 6th uncle's family for so many years. Mom also hopes that they'll have a good life. Okay. Arbor nodded. I'll make arrangements for them. As for the others, Mom, you don't have to worry about them. Isn't it better to let them quickly stay far away from our home? If you're free, you can embroider flowers and raise plants. Isn't that better? Why do you have to bring back some ancestors to worship? Even if you don't find it tiring, I feel tired for you. All right. Wei Ziqin didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she looked at her daughter. Mom knows that you love your mother. Mom understands. Chapter 901. When it was close to noon, Prince Mo came to the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate on his own and picked up Arbor to head to the Supreme Court. On the way, he quietly told her, Royal Father's decree has already been passed down. Tomorrow, Qiao Dongbua's group will be chased out of the capital. Arbor was currently leaning on him, her teeth gnawing on a piece of dried fruit. When she heard this, she looked up and pursed her lips. You hid from your dad yesterday and didn't see him. If you went today, how could your dad not speak ill of me to you? He probably poured out his grievances for the entire morning. Mo Lien laughed and wrapped his arms around her. He lowered his head and rested his chin on her head. Guess what Royal Father said to me? Wasn't it just complaining to you about how fierce I was? Arbor snorted and replied without thinking. That's not it. You definitely won't guess. When his dad saw him entering the palace to meet the emperor, he immediately jumped up from his throne in excitement and dryly said to him, Son, do you think you can buy anything for fun? In the future, buy less of those nonsensical talismans for your wife. You even bought so many of them. Can these talismans be eaten or what? After Mo Lien repeated it, he couldn't resist laughing first. The great king simply didn't expect that you drew all these talismans yourself. He even thought that I bought them for you. How about you draw a few talismans on the spot next time and scare him again? Is there such a sarcastic son like you? Arbor cast him a glance and inwardly cursed him for being a fraud. She reached out to tug on a lock of his inky hair and forcefully tugged. How is the new batch of ebony? I asked Bailey Shi to polish coming along. It's already in the process of being shipped, right? It should arrive on the day of the Lantern Festival. Mo Lien looked down at her with a grin. Jojo, I heard that Duan Yu came to find you this morning. That's right. Arbor rolled his eyes at him. Why are you always sending your tail to follow me? I'll inform you as soon as there's something going on. I'm just worried about you, Mo Lien continued calmly. I heard that you smiled at old Fifth of the Marquis of Suan's estate. Was she smiling? Arbor raised his hand to touch his cold little face and muttered to himself, I don't think so. I don't feel anything. He's smiling. Mo Lien nodded her head with certainty. Lightning, that fellow, even secretly described it. The crown princess suddenly smiled at the Marquis of Suan's residence's old Fifth, like a spring breeze brushing against one's face, like 1,000 trees blooming. The Marquis of Suan's estate's old Fifth was momentarily stunned. Look. Lightning's description was so accurate. What other information did he not have? Oh. That might have been a smile. She didn't have any impression of it. Suddenly, he felt his body lighten. The little fellow who was chewing on a piece of dried fruit was suddenly lifted up and turned around. They looked at each other face to face. What are you doing? Our dear Qiao Mu's small face rapidly flushed red at such a close distance, practically sticking to his face. Smile. Huh. Arbor was baffled. He suddenly leaned closer, so close that she could clearly see his long, curly eyelashes fluttering in the wind as they blinked. Smile. His breath completely enveloped hers, causing her to be completely flustered. She didn't even know where to place her small hands and feet. He was so close that her heart started to sway a bit. Who was this sudden? Who could smile? Smile. He even gripped her small chin with a rather stern expression. Chapter 902. Arbor's large round eyes looked at him, showing a bit of her little white teeth. You didn't smile. Mo Lien moved closer to her face, using his warm face to rub against her little face. You have to smile at me like a spring breeze. He was still brooding over that guy Lightning's description. Arbor thought he was a bit funny, reaching out to grab a strand of his hair. "What did Lightning say to you?" "He said you smiled very warmly at Marquis of Su En's family's old fifth." And the key point was that he was stunned. Damn, just thinking about it made him angry. He wasn't there at the time, but he was there to dig out Marquis of Su En's family's old fifth's eyeballs. "I really didn't smile." Arbor herself didn't remember smiling at that guy. If she did, it was most likely a cold smile. "You did smile," he emphasized, hugging her so close that his face was close to hers. As soon as he lowered his head, he could open his mouth and bite her little mouth. "Hurry up and smile, or else I'll punish you." Arbor only felt that when this man was childish, he was like a little child asking for candy. That pair of curved phoenix eyes contained a trace of soft grievance, practically melting her heart. "You scoundrel." Arbor couldn't help but giggle, subconsciously biting her little mouth, using all her strength to push away his boiling hot body. "Hurry and go away. You're about to burn up." "I won't go." He hugged her, using all his strength to rub against her body. "Smile again. Smile all day long, I'm not an idiot." Arbor was anxious and angry, using a bit more strength to pull on his hair. "Hurry and let go. Otherwise I'll pour water on you." "I won't let go even if you pour water on me." When a certain person pestered her to the point of being a scoundrel, he was absolutely invincible. Arbor couldn't help but giggle, a sweet smile appearing on her little face. She reached out to poke his shoulder. "I'm done laughing, hurry and let go." Seeing that he didn't have any reaction for a long time, he hugged her and stared at her little face without blinking. Arbor was embarrassed to be stared at like that. He hurriedly covered his phoenix eyes that were as deep as the starry night sky. "Why do you keep looking at me? Jojo, you're so beautiful. When I look at you, I feel like my heart is no longer with me." Yes, it looked like it was about to fly. "Just let me take a few more glances at you. You can't lose a piece of meat." "Bah." Arbor turned his face away, puffing out his cheeks and pretending not to look at him. In fact, her heart was beating very fast. She felt that if she was too close to him, he would most likely eavesdrop on her heartbeat and laugh at her. Out of the corner of her eye, she couldn't help but sneak a peek at him. Her sneaky little appearance made Mo Lien's heart soften and she couldn't help but laugh. Mo Lien hugged her and rubbed her up and down. Her voice was low and misty as she mumbled, "What should we do, Jojo? You still have 2 months before your hairpin ceremony." Sigh. He was so anxious waiting. Xiao Mu's small face turned even redder, and she thumped his back with a moderate amount of force. Suddenly, he felt the carriage shake slightly, as if it was slowly coming to a stop. Arbor tugged on his long hair and whispered anxiously, "We're here. Hurry and let go." Mo Lien reluctantly let go of his embrace. Arbor broke away from his embrace with a whoosh, lifted the curtain, and jumped out. The cold wind outside blew, and the heat on her face faded a little. But her heart was beating like a drum, and only she could hear it. "It's still 4:00. It's probably going to be 12:00. Don't wait for me." Chapter 903. Arbor reached out to cover her face. When she turned back to see him following her with a smile, she couldn't help but glare at him. This person had a strange charm all over him, like a magnet that always attracted other people's eyes. He was especially annoying. Mo Lien didn't care that the little fellow was scowling at him. He was secretly amused as he reached out to take her little hand and pulled her towards the Supreme Court's entrance. "We've been to the Supreme Court's prison twice already. I'm familiar with the place, so I won't go down with you, okay?" Arbor nodded, using her eyes to indicate for him to let go. "You're not going down with me, so why do you keep holding my hand? You're obstructing other people's movements." Mo Lien looked at her innocently. "I'll send you to the entrance." The Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor had already heard the news and ran out to receive them. It was the nearly 40-year-old official that they saw last time. Beside him was a naturally supercilious official. When he saw the Crown Prince and Crown Princess, he also came over to greet them with a smile. Mo Lien said in a low voice, "This is official Gu." Mo Lien secretly gave Arbor a look, and transmitted a voice into her ear. "He's the one who barged into Second Imperial Brothers' Fu to capture Ding Ting Ding." Arbor was enlightened. She glanced at official Gu, but didn't say much to him. She followed the Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor to the prison. Along the way, the Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor politely exchanged greetings with Arbor. The capital's Qiao family are all locked up in the prison in the north. Qiao Dongbua and the others are all locked up separately. I don't know which one the Crown Princess wants to see. I don't want to see Qiao Dongbua. Arbor pursed her lips. Take me to the prison cells where the Qiao family's commoners are locked up. Yes. The Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor called over a jailer to lead the way, and he brought Arbor to the largest prison cells in the north. There were 40 to 50 people locked up in each cell. It was a dark mass as far as the eye could see. Seeing that someone was coming over, those people were like dying quails. They couldn't help but cry out, "Let me out," one after another. Scram, scram, scram. The jailer swung his whip and flung back the hands that had broken out of the wooden cell. Arbor passed by and searched for sixth Uncle Qiao's family of 3 in the cell. All of a sudden, a person pushed his way to the front of the wooden cage and slammed his head into the cage. He clung onto the wooden pillar and shouted at her, "Arbor! How dare you come to Arbor? You bitch, you caused us to be in this state, and you still dare to come and see us? You black-hearted, venomous woman, why don't you just die?" A whip struck her hand, and in return, she let out a wail of pain. Arbor turned his head and looked at Joni coldly, a mocking smile on his face. Miss Qiao definitely didn't know that she would live such a miserable life. Arbor tossed her howls and clamors to the back of his mind and strolled past her. He found sixth Uncle Qiao's family of 3 in the third large prison cell. Xiao Mu beckoned at the jailer, having him open the cell door. Instantly, many people attempted to charge out. When the jailer saw this, he effortlessly lashed them back with a few whips. "All of you, behave yourselves. You will be exiled to the northwestern desert tomorrow. There's no need to be so anxious. There will always be a chance to let you out." The jailer's gloating words elicited howls and screams from the Qiao family. They had been living and working in peace and contentment in the Mo Kingdom capital these past few years, and they were used to living like princes. How could they possibly adapt to the bitter cold of the northwestern desert? Chapter 904. Arbor, Arbor. A thin, dark-skinned woman screamed as she rushed to the door, but she was whipped back twice by the jailer. Her eyes were red as she glared at Arbor from across the wooden pillars. "Arbor. Do you still have a conscience? Do you still have the slightest bit of kinship? Don't you think it's enough that you've caused us to be like this? You actually want to send us to the northwest desert? You. Arbor stared icily at the dark-skinned woman from across the cage. This person was her youngest aunt, Su Jiao, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. The current her was even more tanned and skinny than the last time they met, and her chin had already sunken in. Su Jiao looked at Arbor in this state and suddenly prostrated herself on the ground, kowtowing in exhaustion. She sobbed uncontrollably, looking remorseful and heartbroken. "Arbor, eldest niece. Just forgive uncle, auntie, and your cousin. Let us out. Don't send us to the Northwest Army. Woo-woo, that really isn't a place where people can stay. Jojo, take it as second aunt's fault in the past. Second aunt has let you down. If you want to blame or resent me, it's up to you. Please, for the sake of our family, for the sake of your father and mother, let us live. That's right. Jojo, give us a way out." Xiao Zhonghen was truly scared at this time. He originally thought that he could live a good life after being brought back to the Qiao family by Qiao Dongbua, but he didn't expect Qiao Dongbua to be a hypocrite. He found a residence to settle them down, and their family was still starving like before. It was just that the place they lived in was better than the rundown temple, and the decorations in the house were also exquisite. But what was the use of these? They couldn't eat or drink. They only looked good on the surface, but in reality, they were still in a state where they were about to go crazy from hunger every day. Moreover, this time, they didn't do anything. They were completely tricked by Qiao Dongbua and were dragged into prison because of him. They weren't willing to be sent to the Northwest Army like this, so no matter how uncomfortable Su Jiao was, she had no choice but to yield and lower her head at this moment. However, it was as if a fire had ignited in her heart, burning fiercely. She felt that the anger in her heart was about to engulf her. Since when did the people of the first branch become so high and mighty, so high that they couldn't climb up to them? Wei Ziqin, whom she had always looked down on, actually didn't hesitate to use her as an excuse to beg for mercy from the person she had looked down on the most in order to survive. Su Jiao thought with a sour taste in her heart. She raised her head and looked impatiently at this niece, looking like she was begging for her forgiveness. Arbor gazed into Su Jiao's eyes as if he had walked through the long river of history. His long and distant gaze rippled as if it had passed through a century. That pitch-black gaze without the slightest ripple caused Su Jiao's heart to become unsettled. Su Jiao felt that her niece's eyes, which were as cold as a dry well, were a bit frightening. It seemed that ever since this niece was 7 years old, she had accidentally rolled down the hill from the academy. After she woke up from her coma, Su Jiao's life started to deteriorate day by day. Su Jiao was quite unwilling, but now, she had no choice but to admit that this niece's current status was something that she probably wouldn't be able to catch up to in this lifetime. Perhaps only by begging for mercy could she obtain a chance of survival. Arbor glanced coldly at Su Jiao. He took out a pouch of money from his sleeve and threw it at Su Jiao's feet. Su Jiao only felt her heart sink with a thump. Chapter 905. At this time, Qiao Zhonghen cowardly shrunk behind his wife, and Qiao Long didn't even dare to let out a fart. Su Jiao gritted her teeth and trembled as she bent down to pick up that money pouch. When she reached out to open the pouch, her eyes immediately bulged when she saw the piece of silver in the pouch. 20 taels. A string seemed to have been plucked in Su Jiao's head, and her entire brain suddenly exploded. Arbor curled his lips, but there wasn't the slightest hint of a smile in his pitch-black eyes as he stared at Su Jiao and said, "Young aunt, back then, if you had even the slightest bit of..." Arbor made a gesture with his pinky. "Conscience. Then you wouldn't have been so heartless as to conspire with Wu Yanjun to sell my younger sister to the Dou family." Su Jiao's entire body trembled uncontrollably, and her eyes were filled with disbelief as she looked up at Arbor. How did you know it was 20 taels? No more, no less. The commission she received was exactly 20 taels, so how did this child Arbor know? That was 8 years ago. Even this old woman didn't know. Arbor was just a 7-year-old child, so how did she know? Arbor coldly swept a glance at Su Jiao as he approached that prison cell step by step. He softly said to her, "Did you know? That young master of the Dou family is a pervert. If you guys really conspired to send my younger sister to that hell on earth, do you think she'll live past 12 years old?" Su Jiao's entire body trembled. Looking at Arbor's nearly morbid expression, she shrieked in fright, "Don't come over." Arbor halted his steps and coldly gazed at this woman. 20 taels to buy the lives of your family of 3. Keep the change. Old 6th Qiao and 6th Aunt Qiao both looked up at this time and narrowed their eyes as they glanced at Arbor. They didn't seem to have expected that she would be so ruthless as to abandon her own uncle and aunt. Xiaoya, on the other hand, followed behind her parents. Her pair of cold eyes contained a faint light of confusion as she looked at her just like that. "Arbor, Arbor. Su Jiao was thoroughly flustered. She tightly gripped the money pouch in her hands as she cried, threw a tantrum, and regretted her past actions. Jojo, Jojo, Auntie knows her mistake. Auntie really knows her mistake. Can you give me another chance? Or maybe you should give your cousin a chance. Your cousin was just a child 8 years ago. He didn't know anything. He's innocent. Jojo, Jojo, I beg you, don't be so cruel. Innocent. Xiao Mu sneered as she turned around to look at her deeply. If he hadn't been reborn, his sister Jolin would have died next year. At that time, who would give Jolin another chance? Who could pity Jolin? Who could sympathize with her, a person who had lost her mother, her younger sister, and her younger brother? Who could sympathize with her? Her future would be so bleak. Don't blame her for being ruthless. It was an era where either you die or I die. It was better for you to die. Xiaoya and her parents followed behind Arbor and walked out of the prison cell under other people's envious gazes. All sorts of feelings welled up in her heart. When she walked into the sunlight, she saw that person turn around and smile foolishly at her. Her ice-cold heart seemed to have been melted by something as it slightly smoothed out. Xiao Mu sprinted towards Mo Lien and ran headfirst into his embrace. Prince Mo was bursting with joy when he saw that face begging for a hug. Chapter 906. His little fellow had taken the initiative to ask for a hug. It was such a good thing, so of course, he had to firmly grasp it and hug her tightly without letting go. Xiaoya was startled, and her expression was somewhat dazed as she looked at the two people hugging in front of her. Her emotions flashed quickly, and then she lowered her head again without saying a word. Xiaoya. Sixth Aunt Xiao secretly said to her daughter, "It's all thanks to Jojo, oh, no, Crown Princess, that we were able to come out this time. It's all thanks to the Crown Princess' benevolence. Don't have that expression, relax." Sixth Aunt Xiao was afraid that her daughter would offend Arbor, so she hurriedly warned her daughter in a low voice. Xiaoya's expression became more stiff, even a little unnatural, and her head stiffly turned away. Mo Lien calmed the little fellow's emotions and asked softly, "What's wrong? Did the Qiao family say something unpleasant?" Arbor shook his head. "Who cares what they said? It's fine, I just suddenly wanted to hug you." After saying that, the little fellow even reached out to tease a certain person's face. Prince Mo was stunned, and a layer of red quietly crept onto his ears. He hugged Arbor and muttered softly, "You can hug me whenever you want. You can hug me for as long as you want. It's best if you don't let go." "You're dreaming," Arbor muttered softly and reached out to push him. "Let's go." Mo Lien raised her hand to touch her own face. And it was indeed a beautiful face. In order to reassure his mother, Arbor specially arranged for sixth Uncle Qiao and his family to live in a small residence on Shilua Street. The residence had 2 entrances and was of moderate size. It was more than enough for 3 people to live in. Sixth Aunt Xiao tried to get close to her along the way, but she kept calling her Crown Princess instead of the usual Jojo, and the conversation was awkward everywhere. In addition, the Crown Prince, this great Buddha, was present. Sixth Aunt Xiao and sixth Uncle Qiao were so uneasy that they didn't know where to put their hands and feet. They occasionally spoke along the way, but it was quite awkward. Later, they simply stopped talking. When they arrived at the boundary of Shilua Street, the carriage stopped at the intersection. There were tents all around, so the passage wasn't very smooth. It would be faster to walk. Mo Lien held Arbor's hand and led Xiao Laolu and his family to the entrance of the small house. Xiaoya had been silent all this while. At this moment, she raised her head and quickly scanned the house. Something flashed through her eyes and quickly disappeared. "From now on, you can stay here." Xiao Mu glanced at Xiaoya, who had her head lowered, before turning to say to sixth Aunt Xiao, this small residence is basically complete, so you don't need to add anything else. You can directly move in. Yes, yes, thank you, Crown Princess. Thank you. Xiao Lu's aunt hurriedly bowed and expressed her gratitude. Arbor felt a little uncomfortable seeing her being so polite. He sighed softly and said, "If there's nothing else, the Crown Prince and I will take our leave first." Xiao Ye swiftly tugged at her mother's sleeve. Sixth Aunt Xiao froze for a moment before hastily saying with an obsequious smile, Crown Princess, how much food is in this residence? How long will it last our family of 3? Arbor was slightly taken aback and casually said, "It shouldn't be a problem to eat the food until the Lantern Festival. Sister Xiaoye is also a mystic cultivator, so she can go to the city plaza to accept missions to earn mystic currency. When the time comes, she can use the mystic currency to buy food at the food hall." Oh, Sixth Uncle Qiao and Sixth Aunt Qiao answered obsequiously before sending Arbor and the Crown Prince out the door. The end of the 7th chapter. Fragmented Dreams. Chapter 907. After leaving old Sixth Qiao's home, Arbor felt rather fed up and didn't really want to talk after boarding the carriage. Mo Lien sat next to her and reached out to rub her small face. "Why are you spacing out? It's enough after doing this. Everyone has their own lives. Let them be. You're upset because of some random people. I'm not happy to see that. When our family was in dire straits in the past, Sixth Uncle Qiao's family would occasionally send some food over to help us out." Arbor sighed and said, "I know what Mother is thinking. A drop of water should be repaid with a gushing spring, that's right. We should repay Sixth Uncle's kindness. Logically speaking, with our current family circumstances, it shouldn't be a big problem to help if we can. But I keep feeling that. My heart doesn't feel too good." Arbor turned to look at Mo Lien and grabbed his large palm. "Did you see Sixth Aunt's appearance just now? She didn't treat me as a junior at all. She was too courteous and made me feel uncomfortable all over. No, to be precise, it was a hint of flattery, which was too unbearable to look at. In reality, she would rather be like before." However, Sixth Uncle's family, which used to be simple and unadorned, seemed to have completely vanished into thin air in the torrent of time. "I know that the human heart is the most fickle thing," Arbor said aloofly. "It was me who didn't know how to be flexible and worried about nothing." "You're babbling nonsense." Mo Lien pulled her into his arms and stared at her intently. "The human heart is fickle. It's referring to those who sail according to the wind and have unstable minds. I won't change. My feelings for you can be proven by the river of time." Mo Lien lowered his head and kissed her small cheek. Seeing some melancholy in her expression, he couldn't resist adding, "There are plenty of strong-willed people in this world. Take that guy Duan Yu for example. Although he looks especially unreliable, his thoughts and willpower aren't something that anyone can change." Arbor's mouth twitched. She looked up at that man and couldn't resist laughing. "Are you praising him or insulting him? Scoundrel, always badmouthing Duan Yu behind his back." "Of course, it was damage." Mo Lien pursed her lips. "I heard that he invited you to the Lantern Festival." Arbor tilted his head and looked at him with a half-smile. "Are you not coming?" "Of course I'm coming." In Xiao Mu's opinion, boys were really quite noisy. When things were good, they were so close that they could wear the same pair of pants. When things were bad, they would kill each other anytime and anywhere. When she thought of the Lantern Festival, she would have to drag the 3 little radish heads along with the 2 boys who would fight each other from time to time. Her heart was shrouded in a faint trace of sadness. My Zhou's section break, the Marquis of Su An's estate was located rather far from Minshan Avenue. Compared to the bustling Minshan Avenue, the Marquis of Su An's estate was rather remote. Ever since the 4th princess forced Hu family's old third, the Prince Consort, to death, the Marquis of Su An's residence became more and more destitute. Now, even the lintel of the door was peeling off. Only half of the word "and" was left. When the estate's maidservant passed through the sparse corridor, she cowered to the side when she encountered Hu Yukong. Unexpectedly, young master who didn't even look at her and walked away with his hands behind his back. It looked like he was returning to his own courtyard. He actually didn't come up to touch her. The maidservant dazedly stared at young master Hu's back. Could it be that red rain was going to fall from the sky? She looked up at the sky. Chapter 908. Creak. Hu Yukong casually kicked open the door to his own courtyard. Looking at the swaying and broken door, he clicked his tongue and shook his head, a trace of disdain flashing through his eyes. What Marquis' estate? With this kind of wealth, it was simply laughable. Hu Yukong walked straight into his room, closed the door, and walked in front of 100 treasure grid. There was no need to mention the shabby appearance of this 100 treasure grid. On top of it was a leaping horse with paint peeling off, as well as a few cheap jade pendants. Hu Yukong turned a button on the lowest level of the 100 treasure grid. With a whoosh, the 100 treasure grid moved to the left, revealing a small secret room behind it. Hu Yukong continued to click his tongue. Not to mention how crude this mechanism was, just this fucking impoverished Marquis' estate, which didn't even have a billionth of his treasures, still gave him a shitty secret room. In the beginning, he was so excited that he wanted to die. He thought that this guy had really hidden some good stuff, but in the end, there was only a broken copper cauldron, 2 chests of gold ingots, and a few bags of rations. Woo-woo. In the center of the small secret room, a man and woman were tied to a stool, back to back. They looked in horror at the Hu Yukong, who walked in. Their mouths were gagged with a rag, so they could only make muffled sounds. Their expressions were also somewhat twisted. Woo-woo what? Hu Yukong suddenly stepped forward and kicked the leg of the man on the stool. If I didn't see that your place is clean, do you think I would like to stay in your broken place? It's just borrowing a place. Look at how stingy you are. Hu Yukong kicked him 2 more times, then suddenly smiled maliciously. The person tied to the stool was Hu Yukong himself. Speaking of his bad luck, didn't it start from that day in Spring Dawn Garden? After returning from Spring Dawn Garden after being smashed in the head by a fierce woman, Hu Yukong found someone to treat him. After that, he felt that it was difficult to get rid of the gloominess in his chest. That night, he grabbed a young servant girl to relieve his stuffiness. Who knew that halfway through the good deed, the back of his head would be ruthlessly smashed by someone? His eyes rolled back, and he fainted. When he woke up, he was tied up in this secret room along with the average-looking servant girl. And the most terrifying thing was that this woman, who was so enchanting and beautiful that a single glance from her could seduce people to death, actually turned into a living person in front of him. In the blink of an eye, she turned into Hu Yukong's appearance. It was simply too horrifying. A woman suddenly turned into a man. It wasn't a disguise, but a real transformation of his body. Even his Adam's apple could be seen clearly. This was really too frightening. Especially at that moment, when he saw Hu Yukong smiling at him with his identical face, the real Hu Yukong felt as if he was about to suffocate. You good for nothing, look at how scared you are. Hu Yukong used an unprepossessing man's face to smile like a flirtatious woman. The real Hu Yukong was so scared that his eyes rolled back and he almost fainted on the spot. He never knew that he could smile so horribly. The illusion of looking at himself in the mirror made him shudder. Hey, I won't tease you anymore. The Hu Yukong, in front of him, who had an ordinary face, slowly turned into a beautiful woman with pink lips and enchanting eyebrows as the bones in her body cracked. Her voice also changed from a man's voice to a soft female voice. Chapter 909. Once again, he saw the snake beauty successfully transform from Hu Yukong into a beautiful woman. Her entire face, height, figure, and fat had all undergone a terrifying transformation. Greatly agitated, Hu Yukong's eyes rolled back as he finally fainted. Meanwhile, the young maidservant tied together with Hu Yukong was also slightly agape. Because of fear and dread, her entire body trembled incessantly, and cold sweat rolled down her forehead as if she had just been fished out of a river. Tisk, tsk, tsk. The snake beauty sighed and swayed her snake-like waist as she walked up to the young maidservant. The snake beauty slightly lowered her waist, and her face was practically pressed against the young maidservant's face. Her fragrant breath blew past the young maidservant's face. "Don't be afraid, don't worry, I'm a good person." The young maidservant widened her eyes in horror, and her brain seemed to have lost the ability to speak due to the agitation. She could only nod while trembling. The snake beauty giggled and walked to the table on the side without consulting anyone. She then rolled up her sleeves and started to grind ink and lay out paper. "If it weren't for the fact that this Hu Yukong is so useless, why would I come back now?" Sigh, she had finally managed to sneak into the Qiao residence, but in the end, the number of times she had seen this little fiend could be counted on one hand. Moreover, she would stare at her with extreme vigilance every time. She really didn't know where she had exposed herself. They clearly had different faces, so how could she see through the clues every time? Ever since she had failed to find her in Bailon City, she could only return to the Mo Kingdom capital to look for her. Unfortunately, it was difficult to get close to her even after finding her. How vexing. Holding the ink brush, the snake beauty pondered for a while with her chin propped up. Then, with a slight smile, she suddenly lowered her head and started scribbling. After she finished writing, she picked up the entire piece of paper and pouted her small mouth to blow at the ink that hadn't dried yet. A poppy smile spread across her beautiful small face. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Squeak, squeak, squeak. In the Mo Kingdom capital's central plaza, there was an extremely large and long mission board constructed from lapis lazuli. All kinds of missions were posted on it for people to choose from. Many special operations teams would come here every few days to take on a mission in order to maintain their daily necessities. On this day, as usual, there were people coming and going in the city's central plaza. There were too many to count of those who were accepting and handing in missions. When teams that were familiar with each other met, they would politely greet each other and ask each other questions. It was almost noon today, and there were quite a few team members gathered in front of the mission panel. Just like before, they were searching for the mission they wanted to take on according to the various mission lists. Then, everyone's eyes fell on a piece of crimson paper that was stained with ink and had a few words written in flamboyant calligraphy. That wasn't an ordinary mission announcement, but make way, please make way. The vice captain of the giant bear squad, Hannah Mushroom, moved her large body and squeezed into the crowd. "Why are you all in a daze in front of the panel? Hurry up and leave after taking the mission slip. All of you are standing here. Hey, look, are my eyes playing tricks on me? You're not seeing things. This is a visit, at the Spring Lantern Festival, he must take away the Northern Prince Mo's favorite. Notice is hereby given. Signed by, Ding Ting Ding." Hua Gu's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she shouted, "Holy shit. Am I seeing things? Ding Ting Ding has issued a challenge to His Highness the Crown Prince." Ding Ting Ding? What Ding Ting Ding? Is it that Ding Ting Ding? Which Ding Ting Ding is there in this world? Fuck, Ding Ting Ding has gone overboard this time. Wait. Chapter 910. Wow, Ding Ting Ding is going against His Highness the Crown Prince this time. How can this be the same as those people in the past? Oh my god. I'll bet with you that Ding Ting Ding's plan to steal this time will definitely fail. What kind of person is His Highness? He won't let that bastard get away with it. The crowd was in a frenzy as they discussed the matter. Loud noises could be heard everywhere. Guess what treasure His Highness the Crown Prince treasures? Could it be some kind of heaven-defying cultivation technique or something like that? Or some kind of miraculous elixir? Holy shit, Ding Ting Ding can't be coveting His Highness's vast territory, right? Out of the way, out of the way. Everyone, disperse and make way for His Highness. Everyone, out of the way. Don't crowd this place. 2 rows of guards ran over and pushed the crowd to the sides. That lapis lazuli panel was revealed from the bustling crowd. A tall, ink-colored figure slowly approached the lapis lazuli panel. He coldly stared at the piece of red paper fluttering in the wind. He raised his right hand slightly and suddenly clenched his 5 fingers. That piece of red paper flew into his hand with a whoosh. The man's eyes lowered as he coldly stared at the piece of red paper in his hand. No one knew this better than he did. Whatever heaven-defying cultivation technique, miraculous elixir, or even the vast territory, none of them were his treasures. Ding Ting Ding, that damned bastard, actually wanted to extend his demonic claws to his treasure. He wanted to kill this guy with his own hands. Mo Lian's eyes were cold as he tightly clenched the piece of red paper in his hand. When he opened his hand again, the paper had already turned into nothingness and scattered with the wind. Over 1,000 people had gathered in the city's central plaza, but no one dared to speak. His Highness's deterrence was truly a bit terrifying. Everyone could tell that the man was in a very bad mood right now. Who still dared to provoke His Highness at this juncture? It wasn't like they were tired of living. Although no one dared to say it out loud, they were still rather curious. They were even looking forward to the arrival of the Lantern Festival. Ding Ting Ding had been undefeated for many years and was known as the thief sage Ding Ting Ding. They really didn't know if he would fail to steal His Highness's item this time. If he failed, that would break his record of 0 defeats. Several days later, in the estate of the Marquis of Jiayuan. When Arbor heard the report that the goods from Southern Bailey had arrived, she guessed that it must be her batch of ebony. When he ran out to take a look, he saw that the entire manor was surrounded by the children of the Hidden Night Pavilion, leaving not even a drop of water to trickle through. There were more than 30,000 pieces of ebony delivered. Arbor was in a good mood. For the time being, she planned to throw this batch of ebony into her inner world. However, she wouldn't foolishly put it away at the front door. It was better to let someone drag it into the house first. She didn't want anyone to suspect why her inner world was so big. After the things were moved into his courtyard, Arbor asked Xiao Yao, who was beside him, "Xiao Yao, do you feel that there are a lot more people around me these days? Why do I feel like this court is being surrounded by people from all directions?" Xiao Yao's mouth twitched. "Miss, Ding Ting Ding has already challenged His Highness to a battle. How can His Highness not be nervous?" "Oh, he's here to steal from him." Arbor nodded. "Stealing from him isn't stealing from me. Why did he get so many people to surround me?" "Miss, Ding Ting Ding wants to steal His Highness's most beloved. Isn't that you?" Chapter 9:11. Arbor turned to look at Xiao Yao in astonishment. "It can't be." "What can't be?" Xiao Yao was about to be defeated by her little master. "I'm a living person. Doesn't he only steal things? Why would he steal from me?" Arbor stared blankly for a moment before shaking her head and saying, "Doesn't he have to provide food for me even if he steals from me? That's not a loss." Xiao Yao didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she looked at her. "My dear master. That Ding Ting Ding is clearly here to provoke His Highness. Do you think he lacks that bit of food from you?" Mo Lian had been so busy these past 2 days that she didn't come over. Who knew if she was secretly investigating Ding Ting Ding's whereabouts? Arbor was in a rather good mood after cleaning up her ebony pieces. She turned to Xiao Yao and said, "Xiao Yao, let's add more dishes tonight. Xiao Yao didn't make much of a fuss when she heard about adding more dishes this time. She looked at her worried expression with a bitter expression. What's wrong? You're not even happy about adding more dishes. Arbor went up to grab her little hand and said, let's go, let's go. Come with me to the kitchen to take a look and see what dishes we should add. Do you want to drink chicken soup? Miss, why aren't you worried at all? It turned out that when Miss received the news a few days ago, she was still in a daze and didn't know that Ding Ting Ding's target this time was her. No wonder she had been so carefree these past few days. What am I worried about? Arbor snorted disdainfully. If he dares to come, I'll kill him while I'm at it. Then everything will be fine. Xiao Yao turned her head and saw that her Miss's expression was especially serious and didn't look like she was joking. She couldn't help but burst out laughing. That's right. My Miss is so powerful. How could she be captured by that brat successfully? Let's go. Arbor pointed in the direction of the kitchen and dragged Xiao Yao away. Xiao Yao, do you want to ask Mo Lien to withdraw some men? I heard that my father went out for a walk yesterday and almost couldn't enter the house when he came home. Xiao Yao hurriedly shook her head. Let's not. Tomorrow was the Spring Lantern Festival. That Ding Ting Ding had said that he would come to take the young miss away at high. I don't know if he'll try to be sneaky and secretly change the time. It'll be hard to guard against that. Take me away. Darling Qiao rolled her eyes. She made it sound like she was an object. She was a living person. If he said he wanted to come and get it, would she be able to foolishly follow him? It's not like he's sick. All right, don't worry. We'll worry about tomorrow's matters tomorrow. Let's have a good meal tonight. When Xiao Yao thought of the chicken soup that Miss mentioned, she couldn't help smacking her lips and giggling. The next day, Mo Lien personally came to the Marquis of Jiayuan's estate to welcome her father-in-law's family into the palace. The Lantern Festival would be held at noon today, and the people attending were all the people she had met at the New Year's banquet that day. They were the families of third-rank officials and above. The banquet would end at Shen, and everyone could leave the palace to move about freely. The Luo family troupe would be singing in the palace for the entire day today, so the madams and young misses who were interested had gone to Clearwater Fine Park early to watch the opera. The entire Mo Kingdom capital was in a carnival tonight, and there was also a Grand Lantern Festival. All the upper-class madams and young misses planned to join in the fun. The carriage entered the palace unimpeded. Mo Lien was summoned to the old Great King's study. Before leaving, he repeatedly urged her to be careful and safe before leaving in a hurry. Miss, there are many people today, so you really have to be careful. Xiao Yao looked like she was facing a great enemy, vigilantly checking the people walking past them from time to time. Chapter 9:12. That Ding Ting Ding said that he'll come to steal at night. According to Xiao Yao's calculations, that's when you'll be heading to the Lantern Festival. Why don't we cancel the lantern viewing event? Xiao Yao hurriedly said. No. That guy isn't qualified enough for me to change my schedule. Arbor curved her lips and snorted. Sister, what are you talking about? Xiao Lin leaned close to her and asked in a small voice as her eyes turned shrewdly. Nothing. Arbor raised her hand to rub her sister's head. Xiao Lin reached out to hold her arm. Sister, it's still early. Let's go sit over there for a while. As soon as Arbor moved, Xiao Yao followed closely by her side and followed the two sisters in that direction. Wei Ziqin still found it strange. Xiao Yao, did something happen these past few days? I keep feeling that Little Mo's expression was a bit off when he looked at our Jojo today. He looked so nervous. Xiao Yao didn't dare to say anything more to Wei Ziqin. She hurriedly shook her head and said, No. Madam, you don't need to worry. His Highness is so capable. Don't worry, He won't let anything happen to Mississippi. The mother and daughters walked towards a waterside pavilion in Clearwater Fine Park. When they got closer, they saw a group of people walking along the waterside pavilion from the end of the winding white jade corridor. The one leading the group was a girl with a rather haughty attitude. Wei Ziqin recognized at a glance that this girl was the Zheng family's third miss, Her Highness Consort Zheng's niece. As for the two people behind her, they were no stranger to her. The Marquis of Placation's estate's third Miss Su Mingzhu and fourth Miss Su Mingxin. Wei Ziqin's footsteps paused, and she hesitated whether to walk over to greet them. Looking at her two daughters, they had already walked over confidently, hand in hand. Her head hurt when she saw this banquet. If interacting less with people could save her trouble, Wei Ziqin would be happy to hide away. The two groups met in the treasured jade pavilion. Crown Princess. Zheng San wasn't stupid. He nodded and bowed when he saw Arbor. Su Mingzhu gritted her teeth and tightly clenched the handkerchief in her hand. She followed her fourth sister, Su Mingxin, and bowed to Arbor while cursing her in her heart. During their encounter at the Spring Dawn Garden, she had been seriously injured. If it wasn't for the fact that her family had taken out pills to treat her injuries, she wouldn't have been able to walk in just a few days. Su Mingzhu hated Arbor so much that her teeth were itching. However, she had learned her lesson from being impulsive last time. This time, she held her breath and stood aside. She didn't say anything and just looked at Arbor coldly. Third young Miss Zheng smiled at Arbor and said, "This jade treasure pavilion has beautiful and elegant scenery. If the Crown Princess doesn't mind, would you like to sit down and have a drink with me?" Arbor looked at her deeply and shook his head. "No need." After saying that, he pulled his sister and turned to leave. Behind him, Zheng San bit her lip, feeling rather aggrieved. Wei Ziqin's heart was also in turmoil. Seeing that her daughter didn't want to mingle with these girls, she couldn't help but sigh in relief. She nodded repeatedly and followed her daughter out of the pavilion. Unexpectedly, before Arbor could take 2 steps, she was bumped into by a maidservant who pounced on her. Her clean dress was immediately stained with some tea foam, looking very indecent. Arbor looked at that maidservant coldly. "You did it on purpose." That maidservant trembled in fright. Her legs went soft, and she knelt on the ground. She repeatedly kowtowed and begged for mercy. "Crown Princess, have mercy. Crown Princess, have mercy." "Very good." Arbor's lips curled into a cold arc. "I'll fulfill your wish." Chapter 9:13. Is there anyone who doesn't have eyes and dares to barge in like you on a perfectly good road? This was the imperial palace. Which servant girl could be so reckless and live for so long? If she was so blind, she would have been played to death by the imperial concubines long ago. She could tell at a glance that it was fake, yet she still wanted to deceive her. Xiao Lin also pursed her lips with a displeased expression. Even with her intelligence, she could see that there was something fishy about this matter, let alone her astute and sharp older sister. The young royal maid was so frightened that her face turned pale, and she kept peeking at Arbor's expression. When he heard Xiao Mu call for help, his entire body went limp on the ground. On the side, Zheng San's complexion also turned slightly pale. She didn't expect that the Crown Princess would be so ruthless and really want to punish that royal maid without saying anything. She didn't follow the script at all and was simply terrifying. When Lightning and the other person suddenly appeared, the noble ladies were all frightened. They watched helplessly as the 2 hidden guards dragged the person away. When the royal maid's miserable screams came from afar, third young Miss Zheng's small face turned deathly pale. Arbor stroked the dirt on her skirt and looked coldly at Zheng San. "Didn't you say you wanted to treat me to tea?" Zheng San nervously gripped a corner of her skirt and repeatedly nodded while trembling with fear. "Yes, yes. Come, come, prepare the tea." The tea was quickly prepared again. At this time, Su Mingzhu was a bit scared. She felt that the crown princess suddenly staying behind wasn't a good thing. She clearly said that she didn't want to drink tea. Arbor sat in front of them. Her harsh gaze forced the young ladies to not dare to sit down. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly and stood in front of her with their hands hanging down. She leisurely picked up the teacup, sniffed it, and said indifferently, "Top-quality snow sprout tea. It looks really good. It's good that the crown princess likes it." Third young Miss Zheng sighed in relief and bowed respectfully. "Come here." Arbor suddenly raised her head and beckoned to Zheng San. "This cup of tea is for you." Third young Miss Zheng was so frightened that her whole body trembled. Instead of advancing, she retreated several steps. Xiao Mu gazed at her coldly. "You look so guilty and fearful. It looks like you did something shameful. Did you add something to this cup of tea?" Third Miss Zheng shook her head frantically. "No, no. How could this little girl dare to do something like murder the crown prince consort in broad daylight with so many people watching?" Arbor nodded in understanding. "Then you're worried that I've done something to the tea. What if I insist that you drink it now?" Arbor's ice-cold eyes stared deeply at Third Miss Zheng, whose forehead was drenched in cold sweat. With a slight lift of her chin, Xiao Yao immediately walked out from behind her. Taking the teacup from her hand, she strode forward and unceremoniously reached out to pinch third young Miss Zheng's cheeks, pressing her entire body backward until her waist was slightly bent. "Don't be so shameless when the crown princess gives you a reward." Xiao Yao coldly shouted and directly poured the cup of rather hot tea into third young Miss Zheng's mouth. MMPH, third young Miss Zheng, who was in great pain from her cheeks being pinched, resisted repeatedly with a terrified expression. She was forced to drink more than half of the tea, which splashed all over her head and face. Bam! The teacup rolled to the ground and shattered into several pieces. Third young Miss staggered and sat limply on the ground. Tea seeped out of the corner of her mouth, and she coughed awkwardly as she bent over, as if desperately trying to spit out the tea that was poured into her mouth. Chapter 9:14. When Su Mingxin saw that Arbor was enraged and had already knelt down, how could she still dare to speak? She was only an insignificant concubine's daughter. It was already good enough that she could play it safe. She was only afraid that she would be implicated by her foolish older sister. Su Mingzhu retreated many steps and hid to the side with an extremely unsightly expression. How could she still dare to speak up for third Miss Zheng at this time? "Young master," that palace maid confessed. She quickly walked to Arbor's side, her words causing third Miss Zheng's expression to change greatly. Arbor nodded at her. Soon, the pale-faced palace maid was dragged over like a dead dog. She did not have any external injuries on her body, but it was obvious that she was completely unharmed. "Speak." Arbor coldly glanced at that palace maid. "Are you a member of Sephora Flower Palace?" That little palace maid trembled with fear and trepidation as she nodded her head. Third Miss Zheng was furious when she saw this and couldn't help but roar, "Impudent! This young lady has never seen you in Sephora Flower Palace before. Don't think of randomly accusing people." The little palace maid tearfully glanced at third Miss Zheng and couldn't help but wail, "Miss, this servant really can't take it anymore." Just now, those hidden guards made her, an ordinary woman, suffer the pain of having her tendons torn and bones dislocated. How could she bear it? It was simply more unbearable than death. Third Miss Zheng sat on the ground in a sorry state, the corners of her mouth tightly pursed as she glared fiercely at the palace maid. Her gaze seemed to be saying, "Do you think that now that you've confessed in front of the crown princess, your highness consort Zheng will still let you off?" The little palace maid trembled so much that her entire body swayed. Arbor expressionlessly glanced at third Miss Zheng before turning to look at the palace maid. "Why don't I take a guess? What does Jung He want to do this time, unwilling to be left out? If I had fallen into your trap, then I would have had to follow you, who had atoned for your crimes by meritorious service. To change clothes, right? Xiao Mu's cold gaze landed on the junior royal maid as sharp as a knife. Let me think, where do you want to lead me to? Arbor slowly stood up and approached the palace maid step by step. You want to lead me to Young-hee, right? Where are you going? Young-hee must have arranged a masquerade show and is waiting for me. Arbor's eyebrows curved as he looked at the palace maid with a mocking expression. The little palace maid widened her eyes in horror. She still hadn't said anything. The crown princess had already guessed most of it. It was very simple. Arbor had exposed Young-hee's fake pregnancy at the New Year's banquet. With Young-hee's temperament, she would definitely not let Arbor keep this secret. She would take advantage of the situation. To have a miscarriage. Of course, it would be even better if the crown princess could suffer a great misfortune during this miscarriage. Thus, Young-hee's plan was very easy to guess, and Arbor was pretty much right on the mark. In the palace, Arbor was always on guard and always kept an eye out, so how could she fall into Consort Zheng's trap? You slut! Third Miss Zheng struggled to get up and bared her fangs, wanting to push that palace maid to the ground. She believed that the palace maid had secretly leaked the secret, which was why the situation had turned out this way. Tie her up. Arbor bluntly rebuked. Xiao Yao immediately took out a thick hemp rope and tightened it in her hand before walking over to Third Miss Zheng. The great king has arrived. Kneel. The old great king of Mo Kingdom walked over with a face full of anger. When he saw the situation inside the Jade Pavilion, he couldn't help but angrily shout, "Crown Princess!" Chapter 9:15. Xiao Mu coldly turned her head around and shot her gaze at the king, who was charging over in fury. Behind the great king was a Taoist priest in his 40s with a clear temperament. Dressed in green robes, he appeared to have the air of a transcendent being. Gong Chang'an wiped away the sweat on his forehead as he followed behind them with small steps. Apart from the great king, the crown prince and a group of civil and military officials also quickly walked over. Arbor greets the great king. Arbor calmly bowed. Without waiting for the great king to speak, he naturally wouldn't let himself be wronged and straightened up. You! The great king's expression was filled with rage. Before he could speak, the crown prince had already flashed in front of the crown princess. Disgraceful thing! The great king opened his mouth to scold his son, but when he looked up, he saw Empress Xiao walking over with many concubines and noble ladies. After the greeting, Empress Xiao calmly said, "This concubine heard that Consort Zheng just had a miscarriage in Sephora Flower Palace. This is truly too unfortunate. A while ago at the New Year's banquet, little sister Noble Consort seemed to be doing quite well. This happened so suddenly that I'm afraid there's something fishy going on." The great king instantly exploded like a lit firecracker. When he received the news just now, he couldn't keep his cool. His son, whom he had gotten at such an old age, was mysteriously gone. How could he not be furious? If he hadn't lost his rationality due to anger, he wouldn't have directly stood up and led all the civil and military officials here to settle the score with the crown princess. Now, his son had clearly made his stance firm and stood on his wife's side. With so many people present, the great king found it difficult to back down. "Taoist Dayu, please speak." The great king smirked and coldly said. It was that sage-like Taoist priest who took a step forward. His gaze swept over Arbor in a strange manner, and then he said indifferently, "This humble Taoist has calculated that there is a vicious aura coming from the southeast. It will soar into the heavens and transform into a blade that will cut toward Sephora Flower Palace. I just reminded the great king that this murderous aura might be harmful to the great king's unborn children." Priest Dayu shook his head and sighed. "I didn't expect news of her ladyship's miscarriage to arrive so soon." Mo Lien sneered, "Taoist priest, if that's the case, then you're a person who can predict destiny. Why don't you help me divine my fortune for this month? If there's even the slightest mistake, I'll take your life." "Crown Prince," the great king shouted angrily. He hadn't expected the Crown Prince to be so disrespectful to Priest Dayu in front of so many officials. Although Priest Dayu had been in the palace for less than 10 days, his predictions were always accurate. He could even provide the old great king with pills that could relieve his body's pressure. The old great king felt that those pills were even better than the body-strengthening pills provided by the Qin estate's patriarch. After taking them, he indeed felt much more energetic. The great king was displeased that the Crown Prince treated Priest Dayu in such a manner. However, Prince Mo didn't give the Taoist priest any face at all. "Withdraw. What vicious aura. It's all non-existent. If you dare to be disrespectful to my Crown Princess, I guarantee that even the great king won't be able to save your life." Crown Prince. The great king was truly furious this time. Wasn't his wife protecting Demon a bit too much? How could he embarrass his old father in front of so many civil and military officials? How infuriating. Empress Xiao hastily walked up to tug on her son's sleeve and comforted him. "Crown Prince, how can you speak to royal father like that?" Chapter 9:16. He had a miscarriage, and all of you rushed over to find the Crown Princess. Don't you think this is the biggest joke in the world? Your Highness, this is a vicious person. She's not suitable to be the Crown Princess of a country. Priest Dayu looked honest and sincere as he earnestly tried to persuade the Crown Prince. "Stinky priest, what did you say?" Jolin shouted angrily. She was like a lioness that was about to explode. Her hair stood on end. Crown Prince Mo mercilessly slapped the Taoist priest's cheek. However, the Taoist priest shifted his body to the side and escaped from the Crown Prince's palm wind. He was as fast as an afterimage as he stood steadily in front of Xiao Mu. Arbor could clearly see a trace of mockery in Priest Dayu's eyes. It was as if he was mocking her for overestimating herself. She came from a humble background, yet she wanted to fly up the branches and become a phoenix. She wanted to be the Crown Princess of a country. But why? It was her first time meeting this person. She could clearly feel a strong hostility from this person. Mo Lian's anger accumulated in his eyes. He suddenly drew a circle with his left hand and was about to launch a fire attack. His hand was suddenly grasped by Arbor's soft little hand. The storm-like anger in his heart was instantly soothed by her little kitten claw-like hand. The dark clouds parted to see the blazing sun. In a trance, it was a sunny day. This change could be seen by everyone present as long as they weren't blind. They couldn't help but exclaim in their hearts at the power of the Crown Princess. Their willful His Highness the Crown Prince had fallen into the hands of the Crown Princess like this. Stinky priest, what do you mean? Younghee's miscarriage this time was caused by my vicious aura. Big sister. Xiao Lin was very anxious in her heart. How could elder sister say such words without any hesitation? What if she gave others a groundless title of Heavenly Calamity Star, or something like that? What should she do? Unfortunately, I happen to know the real reason behind Younghee's miscarriage. Arbor's sleeves fluttered. Taoist Dayu, who had been paying attention to her all this time, subconsciously took a small step back. 2 dictum talismans floated in front of her. With a whoosh, they turned into 2 streaks of light, directly pouncing onto third Miss Sheng and the young royal maid behind her, one on the left and one on the right. What are you doing? When the great king saw the 2 talismans, his eyes couldn't help but bulge. He cast a dissatisfied look at his son. I already told you not to buy those messy talismans for the Crown Princess to play with. You all know third Miss Sheng, right? Why don't we let her tell us what Younghee wants to do to me? Crown Princess. What did you do to my daughter? State Uncle Jing didn't know why, but he felt guilty and flustered without any reason, and he hurriedly walked out of the crowd to berate her. Arbor glanced at him coldly, then turned to ask, "Third Miss, tell everyone what your aunt instructed you to do." Third Miss Zheng began to recite Consort Zheng's instructions in full detail. When she talked about how Jung He sent the young royal maid over to cooperate with Third Miss Zheng in plotting against the Crown Princess, planning to use a scheme to lure the Crown Princess to Her Highness Jung He's temporary place of labor, the officials and officials of the court all looked at each other. All the officials looked at each other, not knowing if they should immediately disappear and let the king deal with this family matter. Yet the great king's expression was rather unsightly. Chapter 9:17. Shut up. You unfilial daughter, what nonsense are you babbling about? Zheng Chao's face darkened as he strode over and slapped his own daughter across the face. Third Miss Zheng's head fell to the ground, yet she continued to recite her previous words over and over again about how her aunt had schemed to frame the crown princess. Zheng Chao immediately turned around and knelt down in front of the great king, crying out with a grief-stricken expression, "Great king, it's that talisman, there's something wrong with that talisman. That talisman made my daughter delirious, she's completely spouting nonsense." Ignorant and ill-informed person. Arbor coldly said, "Haven't you heard of the dictum talisman? It would only make people reveal the truth. If Lord Zheng didn't believe it. If you don't believe me, I have another one here. You can use it to test its authenticity." Zheng Chao took a step back in fright. He definitely didn't want to use that dictum talisman. If he blurted out disrespectful words to the great king in a moment of carelessness, then wouldn't all his previous bootlicking be for naught? Demon talisman. Zheng Chao could only insist that the crown princess had used a demon talisman. He scrambled over to the great king's feet and cried out in a tearful voice, "Her Highness noble consort wouldn't do that, please investigate clearly, great king." "Great king, do you still not understand?" Arbor's cold voice continued to sound. When the civil and military officials came into contact with the young lady's dark, eerie eyes, they couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. In order to scheme against me and frame me, Jung He didn't hesitate to use the child in her womb as the price to target me. Great king, can't you see such a simple matter? Arbor took a step closer, and the old great king actually unwittingly took a step back. The depths of the girl's eyes were engraved with an abyss of coldness and arrogance. No one would be able to look straight at her and would have to avoid her gaze. Why was Jung He so sure that as long as she lured me over, the child would definitely have a miscarriage? Will the crime be framed on my head? The old king's entire body turned cold as he clenched his fist slightly. He looked at his daughter-in-law in disbelief. Because she had already calculated the time and did not hesitate to use this child to frame me. Because she killed the little prince with her own hands, intending to push me into the abyss. Impossible. The great king's eyes trembled as he roared. Great king, in fact, you already have the answer in your heart, don't you? Arbor said coldly, then returned to the crown prince's side and said no more. Priest Dayu, on the other hand, looked at her with a heavy gaze. There was a strange light in his eyes. This gaze made Arbor feel uncomfortable all over. She suddenly said coldly, "Qinghuan, kill him for me." Everyone's hearts suddenly jumped because the girl had suddenly and decisively issued an order. Priest Dayu was right about one thing. The crown princess was indeed vicious, and her murderous aura was indescribable. Screech. The giant cyan bird suddenly descended above everyone's heads, and abruptly unleashed an ice wind and snow rain at Priest Dayu. Qinghuan, a heavenly bird. Priest Dayu's gaze changed in shock, as if he had never expected that the crown princess would attack him in the palace at the slightest disagreement. He really didn't understand darling Qiao's temperament. Priest Dayu had previously wanted to kill her, so she wouldn't let him off. Whoosh! An icicle struck Priest Dayu's chest. Chapter 9:18. Arbor pressed forward, the ferrule in her hand crackling with sparks. She coordinated perfectly with Qing Luan and struck Priest Dayu's shoulder blade with a thunderous blow. Priest Dayu couldn't dodge the blow to his shoulder blade in order to avoid the icicle in front of his chest. She thought she would be able to break the old Taoist's shoulder blade, but unexpectedly, the irresistible force didn't hurt Priest Dayu at all. It was as if she had hit a pile of cotton. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. Oh no, this person's cultivation was unfathomable. It should be much higher than hers. The Taoist priest even turned his head to give her a strange smile. A giant beast's claw suddenly appeared in front of his chest like a third hand and violently struck Arbor's chest. If she was hit, she would be half crippled even if she didn't die. Qing Luan twisted her body in midair and retracted her wings, turning into human form. She held a long ice sword in her hand and slashed at the old Taoist priest's neck with lightning speed. If the thieving Taoist priest wantonly attacked Arbor, when Arbor was injured, his head would be ruthlessly chopped off by Qing Luan's ice sword. The old Taoist priest didn't dare to act rashly. He could only lean to the side and lean his body to dodge Qing Luan's sharp stab. At the same time, a fierce purple flame with monstrous anger turned into a roaring fire dragon in midair. It fiercely penetrated the old Taoist priest's body from behind and gave him a violent dragon strike. With a boom, he was smashed to the ground. There was absolute silence. All the officials trembled in fear, almost unable to look directly at the crown prince's anger. The old great king also shut his mouth at this time. The crown prince was furious as if someone had touched his reverse scale. After that fire dragon kill, a slender jet-black longsword condensed in his hand. With a sweep, the terrifying vibrating force immediately flattened all the flowers and grass on the ground, directly rolling up dust. The slender Wuxia sword left behind a series of afterimages, as if thousands of swords were spinning in front of everyone. In an instant, he arrived in front of the old Taoist. The old Taoist was about to die on the spot. Bang! After a loud sound, a thick smoke enveloped everyone. They couldn't help but cough as they tried to sweep away the billowing smoke in front of them. Dozens of members of the hidden night pavilion appeared behind the crown prince. Search the entire city and kill without mercy, the crown prince said coldly and expressionlessly. Yes. Countless figures flew away. The crown prince's face was filled with rage, and his anger had yet to dissipate. He grabbed Arbor's small hand and pulled her with large strides as he walked out of Clearwater Fine Park. Everyone was silent, including the great king and Empress Zhao. They seemed to be at a loss for words. The crown prince suddenly stopped and looked back at them coldly. You'd better not challenge my bottom line again. Otherwise, I'll flip the sky. Destroy this land. Don't you dare touch my woman. I will make you regret ever coming to this world. Absolute silence. Father. The crown prince stared coldly at his father, his phoenix eyes burning with intense hatred. That enchantress, if you can't bear to kill her, then let your son do it for you. Zheng Chao collapsed to the ground, trembling as he looked at the crown prince, who had left in anger. The old great king was also shocked, but he couldn't make a sound. When his gaze met with his daughter-in-law's, he couldn't help but tremble. Great king, Young-he killed your youngest son. Can this be forgiven? Chapter 919. Mo Lien grabbed Arbor's little hand and led her out of the palace without looking back. He threw all thoughts of the Lantern Festival banquet and the officials to the back of his mind. The streets were already bustling with activity, and there were more and more people. The two of them shuttled through the crowd, and miraculously, no one dared to get close to them. They all opened up a path for them on both sides. Mo Lien. Arbor puffed up her little cheeks and tugged at his tightly clenched hand. She called out delicately, Mo Lien. Mo Lien led her into a secluded alley and stopped under a winding stone arch bridge. Beside the bridge stood a 3-meter-tall stone pagoda. There were several green plants planted beside the pagoda. In the winter, the leaves had all fallen off. He stood there, his back tall and slender. Arbor couldn't help but tug at his sleeve again. Lien. Mo Lien suddenly turned around and pulled her into his arms with one hand. He pressed her tightly against his chest and stroked her black hair with the other. The man pursed his lips and lowered his head. After a while, he said, "I'm sorry. I've made you suffer again. Let's not go to the palace anymore. I won't let anything like this happen to you again, okay?" He rested his chin on her little head and said unhappily. "Look at you. I'm not even that angry. Why are you so angry?" Arbor tugged at a strand of her hair and comforted her softly. "Your father is an old fool. It's not like you don't know that. Why are you angry with him? Moreover, you were very rude to your parents just now." "Don't do that again," Arbor said softly. "They're not nice to you." "I'm angry at them." Mo Lien rubbed her head in frustration. "Because you're my baby, I hope that the whole world will treat you like a baby." Mo Lien's thoughts were too easy to understand. Arbor's eyes flickered, and he nudged his head in his arms. "Then, your mother already has a knot in her heart. If you do this, I'm afraid they'll dislike me even more. Don't worry about Yoonghee." Arbor's eyes flashed with a cold light. "Since she dares to scheme against me, I will not let her have a good end. I'll get someone to deal with her." So what if she made her father unhappy? This time, Mo Lien had steeled his heart to want her dead. This woman had crossed his bottom line too far. She actually thought of such a malicious method to frame his Xiao Xiao. The plot did not succeed because of Jojo's cleverness, not because of that bitch's benevolence. Yoonghee has been doted on for so many years. She is your father's true love. Arbor hugged his waist and looked up at his gloomy face. He raised his hand and stroked his forehead. "True love." Mo Lien snorted, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "I want her to lose everything. She can't enter the royal tomb until she dies. If he did not grind this person's bones to dust, he would not be able to get rid of the hatred in his heart." Lien. Xiao Mu wanted to console him a bit more, but he hugged her tightly instead. "No one can bully you," he said in a low voice beside her ear. Arbor thought about it and let it go. "Don't look at how this guy usually likes to ask you if you're okay, as if he's asking for your opinion. In fact, he has already made a decision in his heart. Anyway, she just had to do it before he did. And she just happened to learn an interesting talisman. She wanted to find someone to try it on." Chapter 920. When Yoonghee was dragged out of Sephora Flower Palace and sent to the cold palace, the cut on her leg was still bleeding incessantly. Nanny Sue wiped her tears and pulled at the few old nannies along the way. But how could she be a match for those burly nannies? After a few slaps, she couldn't make a sound. The great king has decreed that Consort Zheng's heart is vicious and her morals are lacking. In order to frame the crown princess, she wantonly plotted to murder the royal heir. No one can surpass her viciousness and treachery. From this day forth, she will be demoted to a palace servant and placed in Chonghua Palace. Without an imperial decree, she is not allowed to take half a step out of Chonghua Palace for the rest of her life. Zhengru collapsed on the ground. Seeing this, Mammy Su hastily ran forward and tried her best to help her up. Gong Chan and couldn't help but sigh when he saw the wretched master and servant pair. He rolled up the imperial decree in his hand and said, "Zhengru, the great king is very disappointed in you. In order to frame the crown princess, you actually harmed the flesh and blood in your womb with your own hands. You even caused a serious conflict between the great king and His Highness the Crown Prince. This matter has already been investigated. From this day forth, you can stay in Chonghua Palace with peace of mind and properly reflect. Let's go." Gong Chang and turned around and led 4 or 5 old nannies and a few young eunuchs out of Chonghua Palace. Eunuch, eunuch. Mammy Su lifted her skirt and knelt. She scrambled forward on her knees and wept miserably. Eunuch, please put in a few good words in front of the great king. Our imperial consort was wrongly accused, eunuch. She absolutely didn't harm the royal heir. The crown princess's heart was simply punishable by death. She clearly knew that their imperial consort wasn't pregnant at all, but she told the great king that Her Highness the noble consort had personally harmed the royal heir. What a terrible woman she is. Gong Chang and abruptly stopped and turned back, a cold glint flashing through his eyes. Seize her. Slap him. 2 ferocious old mamas immediately rushed over and clamped down on Mammy Su's arms from both sides. Pa! 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 Remember this clearly. From today onwards, there was no empress. You are an old nanny, and she is just an old palace maid who is not favored. Let's go. Gong Chang and waved his hand and led everyone out of the cold palace. When he went out, he couldn't help but look back at the people inside. He secretly warned himself, don't be as stupid as the women inside. After causing so much trouble, she ended up in the cold palace. What a joke. On the way back to the central palace, Empress Zhao was silent for a long time before she turned to look at old nanny Huaxian, who was walking slowly beside the carriage. Do you really think that the crown princess doesn't know that Jingru's stomach is fake? Huaxian slightly raised her head and bowed to Empress Zhao. Actually, Empress already has an answer in her heart, isn't that so? Empress Zhao only felt a slight chill in her heart. This time, Young-hee really went for wool and came home shorn. She originally wanted to collaborate with Priest Dayu and frame the crown princess for the child's miscarriage. Who would have expected that she would end up with the bad reputation of murdering her own child and framing the crown princess? Young-hee could forget about crawling out of Chonghua Palace for the rest of her life. Empress, after going through so many things, you should be very clear. Don't rashly offend this little prickly head. Once she pricks people, you will die. Empress Zhao felt that she might need to re-evaluate this crown princess. When the carriage passed by the outer walls of Chonghua Palace, Empress Zhao turned back to take a look. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.